ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਸੰਗਤਾਂ ਦਾ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਿੰਘ ਸਭਾ ਦੇ ਸਮੁੱਚੇ ਪ੍ਰਬੰਧ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਜੀ ਆਇਆਂ ਕਰਦਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਕਰਦਾ ਹਾਂ। ਅਸੀਂ ਬੜੇ ਅੱਜ ਬੜੇ ਭਾਗੀ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਸਾਡੇ ਨੌਜਵਾਨ ਸਰਦਾਰ ਰੇਸ਼ਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੋ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਿਰਸੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੀ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਦੇਣਗੇ, ਜੋ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਬੜਾ ਅੱਛਾ ਪ੍ਰਬੰਧ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਿ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਮਿਲੇਗੀ। ਅਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਾਅਦ ਜੇ ਦੁਆਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਣਦਾ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬੇਨਤੀ ਕਰਾਂਗਾ ਕਿ ਸਟੇਜ 'ਤੇ ਆਏ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਆਪਣਾ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰਨ। ਅਤੇ ਕਰਮਵੀਰ ਮੈਂ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਮਾਰਾਂਗਾ, ਪਲੀਜ਼ ਸਟੇਜ 'ਤੇ ਆਓ। ਅਤੇ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਗੱਲ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਜੀ ਆਇਆਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋਏ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਿੰਘ ਸਭਾ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਅਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਾਨ ਸਨਮਾਨ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਬੋਲੇ ਸੋਨਿਹਾਲ ਸਤਿ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ। ਅਤੇ ਉਮੀਦ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਦਰ ਮਾਨ ਸਤਿਕਾਰ ਅਤੇ ਪਿਆਰ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸੁਣੋਗੇ। ਅਤੇ ਆਓ ਜੀ ਆਇਆਂ।
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਭਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਨੂੰ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਬੜੇ ਮਾਣ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਆਪ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਰਵਣ ਕੀਤੇ ਆ। ਸੋ ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ to everyone who's come to attend and to Sri Guru Singh Sabha, Guru Nanak Road in Southall, who have given me this opportunity to share some of the work that I'm a part of with Maharaj's Kripa. I'm sure that most of you have seen some of the work that we're doing online, but just to introduce myself. So my name is Resham Singh. I'm one of the trustees of a relatively new charity called Virasati Asthan Seva. And Virasati Asthan Seva was something that myself and a couple of close colleagues and friends had been thinking about for a number of years. And one of them is actually Jasdeep Singh, who's engaged in Poti Seva upstairs, a separate charity, but someone who's been involved in conservation for a very long time, focusing specifically on Gurbani Pothis, using traditional and advanced modern techniques to restore Gurbani Pothis to their former health. Virasati Asthan Seva, what does it actually mean? Virasati is the Punjabi word for heritage, virasat, that's where it comes from. Asthan is a generic word that we use in Punjabi to refer to a place. It comes from Sanskrit. Its root is in the word ast, which means something physical or something permanent, or where something comes to reside, like a stool, for example. And then seva, of course, is selfless service. So this is why we picked this name. So it's a charity that's focusing on the heritage of Asthans through seva, and that's why we're called Virasati Asthan Seva. Today's talk, and I have to thank Karanvi for helping me brainstorm the title. Why have we called it Beyond Bricks and Mortar? So often, I've been engaged in running this charity now for more than a year and a half. And I'm still running another charity, Bhai Gurdas Educational Trust, where we've published translations of Sri Nanak Prakash and things like this. But through the scope of our work, we've come across sometimes a statement that gets made. Why are we worried about bricks and mortar? Why are we worried about physical buildings? This is a sentiment that comes up a lot in the community. And so I thought, well, alongside Karanvi, perhaps we should title this talk Beyond Bricks and Mortar. Because yes, buildings, gurdware, dharamsal are made from bricks and mortar. But in my opinion, and hopefully by the end of this talk, you might share the same opinion as me, I think they carry a lot more value than that. And that's why the subtitle is The True Value of Sikh Heritage. And I hope through this talk to demonstrate that to you. We've got 2 hours or slightly less. There will be points in this talk where I'd like you to give me a bit of engagement, feedback, a bit of discussion. Because I thought to myself, I don't really want to just lecture you for 2 hours and tell you what my thoughts are. I would share my thoughts with you because I've had a lot of time to reflect on these things. But I would also like you guys to give me your thoughts as we go through. Number one, that will help us have a richer conversation, which is what I kind of want this to be somewhat. Number two, it will also help me understand where does the community lie on this subject? What do they understand about it and how do they feel about it? And that's important because we need to work together as a community. And if there's something that we're missing or something that you can add to the conversation, and you can add something to the conversation, which is why I'm here, then that will always be something useful for us that we will look to implement. And so the first thing I want to ask you is a very generic question. Most of you, I assume, have probably been to some sort of heritage or historical site in this country or abroad. I just want you to take a few seconds to think, where was the last place you went? And I would prefer it if you didn't tell me somewhere in Punjab, somewhere here, or somewhere in Europe, or somewhere outside of India. Where did you go that was a historical site? And by historical site, I mean something that's still got antiquity. And why did you go there? And I'll give you like 30 seconds to think about it. And then if you don't mind, if you've got some answers, I know Gurumi, you will have some answers. So if I get a quiet room, I'm just going to pick on you. So just take 30 seconds. Where did you last go? Somewhere historical, and why did you go there? And how did it make you feel? Just those 3 questions for a few seconds. Okay, have I got any takers? Okay, Simji, what's your name, sorry? Avneet Singh, okay. In Paris. Okay, and why did you go there? So the Louvre is obviously somewhere that's quite well known. Can you pick on one thing that you thought was like, okay, I'm so glad I came to see this aspect of it? What was the, I mean, I'm asking you lots of spot questions, so if you can't remember, don't worry. What was the oldest thing that you saw there, roughly?
I walked past a lot.
Yeah, no, that's fine. But the point is thousands, yeah? Yeah, it's great. Anybody else? Anywhere they've been? On holiday? Yeah, at the back? Where's that? And why did you go there? Just ordaining or for work or? Okay, cool. So that's very interesting. Oh yeah, so Singh, tell me the name of where it was again? Middle Temple in central London. Yeah. So I'm just repeating it for the Crusades. Yeah. So that's very interesting. So Singh at the back is talking about a building in central London that has associated history with the Knights Templar who, you know, went to go and fight in the Middle East during the Crusades when they were trying to liberate Jerusalem and the Holy Lands from Islamic rule. So you're looking at, what, just over 1,000 years worth of history in one place. How old is Sikh history, everyone? We should all know the answer to that question. Yeah, 556 now. Guru Nanak Dev Ji's Avatar is 1469 in the English calendar. So if we start Sikh history from Guru Nanak Dev Ji, which we do, 556 years, so half that. The reason why I ask this question, though, is that I know from a lot of my friends, I know from my own personal experience, that when I go somewhere, be it holiday or even for work, I generally go and find something to go and see. So I have had the pleasure of going to Rome. I've had the pleasure of going to the south of France. Both of these places have some of the oldest colosseums. In fact, the one in France is older than the ones in Italy, and in better condition as well. But when I ask this question, the reason that we ask it is to understand that actually, as Sikhs brought up in the West, we have this understanding that there are historical buildings that have been looked after by the relevant civilizations to who they apply. So obviously the British have looked after things here, the Italians have looked after things in Italy. And as you rightly pointed out, a lot of these buildings have survived world wars, blitzes, bombings, targeted assaults, and are still standing today. But then the question that arises then is, well, if our faith comparatively is relatively young, half that, do we have any buildings that relate to that sort of, you know, are they that old? Are they 556 years old? And I think you'll probably know the answer to that question is no. Let's contextualize now what was going on in the rest of the world when Guru Nanak Dev Ji arrived. This is the Sistine Chapel from the Vatican. This is where, when the Pope dies and they're trying to select a new one, this is where the cardinals come together and they sit here until they find a new one. All this fresco work that you see was painted in 1508. So it's from the same time period as Guru Nanak Dev Ji. Guru Nanak Dev Ji's time period is from 1469 to 1539. So when Michelangelo was painting this stuff, Guru Nanak Dev Ji was Prakash on this world and preaching Gurmat. And I think that's important, because when I went there, I thought about that and I thought, wow, so there's something standing here of such great importance to the Western Roman Catholics, a place where they've been picking their religious leader, who's the leader of 1 billion people in the world, and has been maintained to this level. And bearing in mind, I'll refresh your history, Italy also went through a lot of turmoil historically, anti-religious movements, World War II, Mussolini, all these things, where the papacy and things came under threat. So this building has survived all of that. And these frescoes are still very well maintained. I've seen them myself. They are quite awe-inspiring, telling the story of Jesus Christ and the apostles. And it just gives us a reference point, because to my working knowledge, we do not have a building of this age that relates to Sikh history that's still standing, which is quite shocking when you think about it. This is even more shocking. This is the Dome of the Rock, the third most important site in Islam, located in Jerusalem. So you can imagine Jerusalem has been the site of 2 crusades. It has been the cradle of civilization for 3 world religions, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, and they have been fighting over this site for the best part of 2,000 years. This mosque was constructed in 1692. This is 100 years after Muhammad came, something like that. It's supposed to mark the spot where the Prophet ascended to heaven. But this building, as it looks now, has been there for the best part of 1,400 years. 3 times the ages of Sikhi in terms of the narrative timeline. Subject to crusades, and the crusades were the world wars of their time, right? The amount of blood spilt to liberate these sites, and yet it's still standing. And the other thing that perhaps, it depends how well versed you are in Semitic history, but this site is shared with the Jews on the site of the Second Temple of Solomon, which is contested, right? So the Jewish tradition believes that their original temple that was destroyed by the Babylonians stood at this spot as well. So it's contested, but yet it's still standing. And you can see this tile work on the outside is typical of Ottoman tile mosaic work. And it's been maintained to this level in one of the world's most conflicted areas. This is Westminster Abbey. Some of you may have been there. All Apane Rani and the rest of them get married here. This is their version of Anandgaraj Central. 800 years old, this building, with huge vaulted ceilings, standing there, surviving the Blitz, all of these things. You can see the common narrative I'm trying to thread here. But let's look closer to home, a little bit closer. This is southern India, Tamil Nadu. And let's not forget that we as citizens of this area of the world, or certainly having heritage from here, the Indus civilization or the Indic civilization that inhabited northern India and even down then to the south is one of the most ancient civilizations of the world, well renowned for its contributions to the world, especially in areas of mathematics, science, astrology, Ayurveda, health, all these types of things, and construction. This mandir is over 1,000 years old, carved entirely from rock. Again, it's still standing. Double the age of anything that we have, in fact, probably 4 times the age of anything that we still have standing today. So the purpose of this is to say, well, this is what other people are doing. Then the follow-up question is, well, if we haven't been doing it, and I think I've probably tried to demonstrate to you that we haven't been, because I don't think anyone can tell me of any building that's older than 200 years that we still have standing, then the question that then comes is, well, should we be doing what these guys are doing? Is it a Sikh practice to save buildings? Or is it not a Sikh practice to save buildings? We're going to think about that now. So when we started to do the podcast for Basics, this comment came into us. And I put it up here not for the purposes of criticizing whoever sent it, but I actually thought it was quite interesting because it represents a common viewpoint that I come across all the time. It's not one that I particularly agree with, but I want you guys now I'll read it to you, and then I want you to think about it and tell me what your thoughts are on it. Because this is the reason why I picked it was because it wasn't a flippant comment. It's something that I have come across quite commonly from members of the Sangat. And I think it helps us to understand this argument, to look at the point of it critically, and then that helps me shore up my position that perhaps what I'm doing is right or wrong, which I think is very much a Sikh practice. As Sikhs, we're meant to do vichar, use Gurbani as the touchstone, as the relevance point, for then deciding how we go forth. And beyond all of that, doing ardas for Maharaj to guide us until such time that we shed our egos. But I would speak for myself that the majority of us are not anywhere near that. So we have to try our best with humility in our hearts. So this person said, I get that history and historical sites are important to some extent, but at the same time, Gurmat teaches us not to have attachment to anything. And then they gave this pankti as their evidence. Gauri Cheti Mahla Pehla on Ang 145. So, De Neev Diwal Usari Pas Mandir Ki Teri, Sanche Sanch Na Dei Kisahi And Jana Sab Meri, Soen Lanka, Soen Madi, Sampa Kisa Na Keri. So, this is Guru Nanak Dev Ji Shabad. And you can see here, digging deep foundations, the walls are constructed, but in the end, the buildings return to heaps of dust. People gather and hoard their possessions and give nothing to anyone else. The poor fools that everything is theirs. Riches do not remain with anyone, not even the gold palaces in Sri Lanka. I want to pick this apart a bit. I'm going to spend a bit of time here before I move on. That first sentence, who agrees with that sentence? That Gurmat teaches us not to have attachment to anything. You can do a show of hands. Okay, not to have attachment to anything. Does Gurmat teach us to have attachment to Guru Sahib? I'm seeing some nods and slightly, yeah? Does it? Yes, it does, right? So the statement that Maharaj teaches us to have attachment to not to have attachment to anything isn't actually correct, in my opinion. I'll leave you guys to make your judgment. I'm not here to tell you, but in my opinion, it's not correct. Because Gurmat teaches us that above all you have to have dedication to the Guru. And we have a million Sakhis of different Guru Sikhs that have demonstrated this. If you want to learn more, you can, Bhai Kamalpreet Singh Pradeshi, he writes a lot of translations. He's done one on Bhai Manj. The Sakhi of Bhai Manj is very interesting. In a nutshell, Guru Arjan Dev Ji tests the Shavda Bhai Manj to the nth degree. First, they have to give up their house, then their wife and children, then their money, all of this, and he does willingly. I'm really shortening the Sakhi. It's worth looking at. I can send you links to some katha on it as well. The point being, though, is that Guru Sikhs of the past have done anything and everything for the Guru, out of Shraddha. Okay? So people talk a lot about attachment, and then they give panktiyan, and anybody who's done a cursory read of Gurbani, and I'm not pretending to be an expert or a sant or anything, I'm just sharing my learnings with you. When you do a full reading of Gurbani, you will find sometimes Guruji tells you one thing and then tells you another. Okay? At some points, Guruji says, Socha sochna hovai, je sochi lakhwar, right? They'll say things like, why go for bathing? What's the point of it if your insides are dirty, right? And then some people will then use that argument to say, well, we shouldn't do any bathing, we shouldn't go to the sarovars, we shouldn't do anything. But the extreme of that argument then is then I shouldn't bathe at all. And this is what people do, right? They take the extremes of the argument. They don't understand that what Guruji was doing was breaking people with extremist views on both sides of the fence. So where in Sanatan Dharam, people started to believe that if they went to bathe at 68 places of pilgrimage, that would be enough for them to get mukti, Guruji's done khandan of that, destroyed that argument. What they haven't said is that you shouldn't bathe. And we'll talk about bathing in a minute, about why that's important. Equally, where Guruji's talked about, they even say, and I'll show you a pankti later in the presentation, that to give in charity and to bathe is pointless. They say that outright. But there's a caveat to it, and I'll show you it in a second. The caveat is it's pointless without naam, because something that's done that we think, oh, I give in charity, but if it's done with ego, it completely voids the charity. So there's a missing ingredient. My point being is that Gurmat is a nuanced philosophy. What Maharaj has done is, and I'll take you through this, how I perceive it, because a lot of people throw this accusation out that Guru Nanak Dev Ji, when you read their Barni, they're all about criticizing ritualism. Why are you bathing here? Why are you honoring your ancestors here? Why are you idol worshipping? All of this type of stuff. Almost breaking the barriers of institutionalized religion. And then people then criticize and say, well, then the Sikhs are institutionalized themselves. And Guru Gobind Singh Ji gave them this thing that they're now stuck in and this, that, and the other. I would argue that what actually the Gurus were doing, Guru Nanak Dev Ji was breaking extremist rigidity and external practice that is devoid of any internal reflection. If you follow me on that. So external practice, doing things for the sake of doing it, easy things, right? I call them easy. To give money is easy. To introspect and try to conquer your mind is conquering the world. Man jeeta, jag jeet. We read it every day. Hardest task. Very easy to make money, very easy to give it. And get the halla sheri wawa, bahut dani banda, right? Very easy to travel to pilgrimage sites and bathe. Not so easy to confront yourself and try and tear down the walls of your ego and your identity and the sense of self that we are all born with. So what I would argue is that Guru Nanak Dev Ji was breaking, and we have to remember what society was like at that time. Huge religious barriers. Muslims and Hindus would not even eat from the same place. They wouldn't drink from the same well. They wouldn't even, and the Hindus amongst themselves, the higher caste wouldn't associate with the lower caste. The lower caste couldn't read the Veds. They couldn't even listen to them. The women of any caste couldn't even go in the mandir, right? This is, sometimes we aren't able to really appreciate that now because we live in a far more liberal world. But this is the world that Guru Nanak Dev Ji came into. And if you go to rural India, you'll still see all of this. We don't see it so much in Punjab. It's still there. But the real extremities of that practice is still very prevalent in the sort of folk areas and deeper rural areas of India. So I would argue that Guru Nanak Dev Ji was forcing us to break empty, meaningless external action when it's devoid of naam, when it's devoid of introspection. And this is what the Sakhis with Malik Bhaggo and Bhai Lalo, so where Guru Nanak Dev Ji extracted the blood from the roti of the rich man who exploited everyone and ate the roti of Bhai Lalo the carpenter. That's what these Sakhis are meant to be teaching us. But where I will try and demonstrate this dichotomy as more as I go through. So, de neev diwalu sari pas mandir ki teri. Digging deep foundations, the walls are constructed, but in the end, the buildings return to heaps of dust. Now, I'm not going to quibble with Gurbani. I man this completely 100%, but using this shabad to back this statement, I don't agree with, the top statement. Why? Because the next line gives the clue. People gather and hoard their possessions and give nothing to anyone else. The poor fools think that everything is theirs. Can we say that Sikh Astan, Dharmic Astan fall into that category? Do we build them for ourselves or do we build them for the world? Do we build them to revolutionize mindsets? And to be honest, they're the bastions of the world feeding the homeless, the poor, the hungry. So is a Gurdwara ever just built for one person's selfish interest? Or is it the home of the Sangat, where we find spiritual food and physical food? We nourish ourselves, we replenish ourselves both spiritually and physically. That's the question I ask. So does this Pankti relate to the Guru Astan? I would argue it doesn't. So for it to be given in reference to the Guru Astan, I think is a false analogy. And at the end, Soin Lanka, Soin Mari, Sampa Kisana Keri. And again, these are the facts of life. This world, Maharaj tells us, right? Salok Mahalanawa, Sir Kampeo Pag Dagamaga, Nan Jotehin. We get told time and time again, Guru Bani, that this body is just a pile of dirt. Don't have attachment to it, right? Equally, there are shabads, now I couldn't memorize all the panktiyan for you. I can dig them out and send them at the end, where Maharaj has said that this Sarir is Harmandir, the temple of Vaheguru. Again, on the surface, two contradictory statements, but why? Perspective. Think about the perspective that Maharaj is trying to destroy. Number one, we see it today on social media, right? Even though I don't want to look at it, I see it in my algorithm. You see all these fitness influencers who are completely focused on the aesthetic of their body. They want to see this aspect of muscle. They're trying to cut away this fat. Or from the women's perspective, they're doing all, I work in healthcare and all I see is all this cosmetic stuff going on, lip fillers and all this, that and the other. I wish I didn't have to know, but there you go. You have to in the medical profession. Do we not think that Maharaj is talking about that level of infatuation with the body? But certainly, again, how do you take both things to extreme, right? Where people in India thought this body is just, because it's not a new thought. When you think about Shankaracharya and the Advaita Vedantas, and I'm not going to take it too far here, but I'm just giving you examples. The Advaita Vedantins believe that once you get jnana and knowledge, that any action, karam, worship or anything is completely void, you just have to sit there. And that's why they adopt sannyas, by leaving home, leaving family, and going and sitting in a jungle, basically waiting to die. Okay? That is the traditional Sanatan way of living. So in Guru Nanak Dev Ji's time, what people would do, the higher caste, Kshatri and Brahman, they would raise their families, earn a living, and then when they got to about 40, 50, they would then completely shun their families and go and live in a forest somewhere, hoping to attain enlightenment. That was the status quo for trying to spiritually uplift yourself. Now we know that Guru Nanak Dev Ji destroyed that and advocated the Grist Dharam instead. So Guru Nanak Dev Ji is doing khandan of these people saying, having attachment to your body, thinking it's permanent, thinking that it's yours, thinking that you are the body, that's what you need to destroy. But equally with this body, it's only with this body that you can japa naam. It's only with this body that you can do seva, right? So the criticism of the body is what do you do with it? And how do you identify with it? If you see it as nothing more as a vessel for the Atma, and for the Atma to engage in what it needs to shed its identification with the body, then perhaps you're probably onto the right track. If you're stuck in body image that I am Resham Singh, this is who I am, or this is my ego, and this is what I've done, and this is my profession, and this is my house, meri karke, this is what Maharaj is trying to destroy. But do you see how you can't take the extreme of either argument? Because if you were suddenly to say, Sir Kampeo Pag Dagamaga, fine, I'll just neglect my body. I won't eat. I won't fuel it. I won't exercise. I'll just sit there like the Advaita Vedantins until I die. Right? That's the extreme of that thought. It has to be contextualized and moderated. So this is why I put this out there, because people often give this argument. They're just buildings. We shouldn't have any attachment to them. The world is perishable, blah, blah, blah. Now, the question I like to ask people is, people like to say this in regard to dharmic asthans, right? We shouldn't spend money on them. We shouldn't beautify them. And there's a good argument for that, and I agree with it to some respect. But I have yet to meet a Sikh that will do that in regards to his own home. We all do extensions. We all do kitchen upgrades. I've just done one. You will not go into the book and think, okay, I'm going to get the worst quality stuff because I don't really care about it. No, we all do our houses up properly. Nice tiles, nice appliances to the limit of what we can afford, right? And nobody then says, no, we shouldn't have attachment, shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that. You know, I haven't found a single Sikh, even the person that made this comment, I'm pretty sure, unless you're living in a hut somewhere, you don't apply that same rule to your own life. So why do you apply it to the Guru Kar? I would argue that the Guru Kar, yes, they need to spend their money properly. This Gurdwara is starting to do so many initiatives, you know, in the community, gardens, clubs for the elderly, mental health, these lecture series talks, you name it, right? The Gurdwara are going back to what they used to be, which is a community life hub, not just a place for, okay, Tika, you want to get married, Anand Karaj kar lo, Tika. The Gurdwara was always much more than that. Let's come on to that. Let's talk about the evolution of Asthan Gurdwara. This is a very brief, broad map of how the Gurdwara came to be. Pehla sama Guru ka liya, jadon Guru Sahib aap pragat sige, te aap, Asthan sthapit karde sige. We know that Guru Nanak Dev Ji was the first person to start this. Guru Nanak Dev Ji established Kartarpur. So where people are saying, the Guru is saying, oh, don't have any attachment to anything, just sit there, or we shouldn't have attachment to buildings, the Gurus were teaching a nuanced message and actually then established towns and cities themselves, right? So we have the evidence from the Gurus themselves. They are the ones who started making asthans. Otherwise, they could have just said, "Tusi kar baith ke, just do it like that. We don't need any sangat. But just focus on your inside. It's all about the Dil Saaf type thing." They didn't say that. Kartarpur, Goindwal Sahib, Khadur Sahib, Guru Angad Dev Ji, Taran Taran, Sri Amritsar, Kiratpur, Nanded, the list goes on. Yeah, Patna, all of these places. But many cities, Makhwal, Anandpur Sahib, all established by the Guru Sahiban. The Sarovar, the Panch Sarovar of Amritsar, all of these places, Bauli Sahib, the list is actually endless. Sri Hargobindpur, all of this. Then what happens? We go through a period of the first 5 Gurus where things are relatively stable, and then the period of the last 5 Gurus, things are unstable from a political sense because the Mughals are coming up, we're coming into conflict with them. 2 of our Gurus are made Shaheed. Guru Gobind Singh Ji is fighting with these guys 14 times. They're forced to evacuate Anandpur Sahib. Anandpur Sahib is partially destroyed. We lose a lot of heritage this way. Then a second round comes. I've actually seen a hukamnama. It was recorded by somebody I hold in great esteem, Gyani Thakur Singh. Gyani Thakur Singh was a very great pracharak in the early 1900s. He was actually in the Panj Pyare of Sant Atar Singh Mastwane Wale. He was an army granthi. I'm responsible for initiating thousands into the Khalsa Brotherhood. And he wrote a book called Sri Gurudwara Darshan. And in that book, he records a hukamnama that he obtained from the Soddis of Anandpur. The Soddis of Anandpur are the direct familial descendants of Guru Gobind Singh Ji and Guru Hargobind. Okay, so even to this day, you can't see them because they keep them private. They have a lot of what they call khas patre, handwritten things of Guru Gobind Singh Ji in their hut. And Bhai Thakur Singh records that there is a hukamnama that he saw from the Soddis that was given from Guru Gobind Singh Ji to Baba Banda Singh Bahadur saying 10 points. But the one that I want to focus on is that it says to go to Sarhand and build a yadgari for the Chote Sahibzade. It's a direct hukamnama. Now people will say, oh, why are we building Gurdwara? Fine, Tika, the Gurdwara established towns and cities. But here we have a hukamnama that directly links Guru Gobind Singh Ji instructing the Sikhs to make a yadgari. Yadgari ki hundaya? Yadgari, somewhere where memory is retained. Something to mark a spot where something has happened. Obviously the Shaheedi of the Chote Sahibzade was a huge thing. And to punish Wazir Khan and the whole Mughal establishment there, Baba Banda Singh was sent. And he did that. He raised the hunt to the ground and established a very small memorial there. So we get a bit of power for a few years. Baba Banda Singh establishes the first Sikh rule. It doesn't last very long. We are then hunted en masse. We have the Chota and Vadda Kalukara. Half the Sikh population is decimated in one day. We really struggle. There's no time for building anything. We're being hunted on horseback, living in jungles, being martyred all across the place. Then the Misl era comes. And in the Misl era, all the Sikhs get together. The Mughal power is waning. People like Baba Baghel Singh, they get together. The Dal Khalsa is formed and they conquer Delhi. Now look at this. I like to point to this. You guys, some of you may have attended Ranveer Singh's talk on Padshahi Mehma. But Baba Baghel Singh was a master strategic thinker. He conquered Delhi but knew he didn't have the resources to hold it because the Sikh numbers were too small. Ginti Kat Singha. So what did he do? He secured a deal with Shah Alam who was ruling Delhi at that time and said, I'm going to build our Gurdwara here and you have to pay me tax. And he didn't try and take over the whole city because he couldn't hold it. He made the Mughal governor or ruler a vassal of his. And all the Gurdwara in Delhi that you see, so Sisganj, Rakabganj, Nanak Pyao, all of these Bangla Sahib, we owe all of their existence to Baba Baghel Singh because Baba Baghel Singh was the one who built them. Well, the original buildings anyway. There's a story that when Baba Baghel Singh was trying to find Sisganj, the site of Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji Shaheedi, he couldn't find it. Because obviously, when Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji was made Shaheed, it was a Mughal area, right? Bhai Jetha to sneak away Guruji's cease and take it. It was not in our control. The story goes that Baba Baghel Singh found the site through speaking to an old Muslim lady whose father had washed the execution site. And that is how Baba Baghel Singh found Sisganj, Chandni Chowk, where we all now go. And this year is Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji's 350 50th Shahidi Purab that's coming, right? But think about it, what our forefathers, what our previous Sikhs have done to secure these asthans, right? Clearly, the early Sikhs understood the value of keeping historical sites and finding them and marking them. Then what happens is Maharaja Ranjit Singh rises, the Mughals are pretty much decimated, the Sikhs come to power, and we have rule. And this is really, this 50-year period is where we see a massive explosion of Sikh architecture and building. Because finally, after a 100-year period of no stability, no power, being hunted, we are able to build. Because you can only build something if there's political stability, right? If you're being hunted and you're fighting wars, there's no time to raise monuments. There's no time to settle. You're moving from one place to another. And that's where we see the massive expansion. The Maharaja Patiala, Maharaja Karam Singh, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the Maharaja of Jind and Nabha, these guys go on a massive project to now bring Sikh architecture, Sikh buildings back and to mark this territory, Punjab, northern India, for all the history that the Sikhs and the Sikh Gurus have put for us. And then unfortunately what happens is 100 years later, we get screwed over and the British take over and we lose power over these sites. The Gurdwara are taken over. The British start to manage. There was a British-managed Sarbarah who managed Darbar Sahib, or they put the asthans into the corrupt hands of people who were not worthy. So those of you who know your history will know about the Nankana Sahib Morcha, the Jaitol Morcha, Gurka Bagh Morcha, to get these Gurdwara out of the hands of the corrupt. And all of this corruption occurs within this period. And then the big kick in the teeth comes when partition happens, and we lose, in my rough estimation, about 60 to 70% of our heritage sites in West Punjab, Pakistan, in the partition, where we now have no say, very little. Okay, so that's the timeline. So in terms of my point about institutionalization, I would argue that it didn't start with Guru Gobind Singh Ji, Guru Har Gobind. I would argue it started with Guru Nanak. Hanji. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a very good question. So Paji's asking, were they always Gurdwara that are built? The Gurdwara as a term is a relatively modern one, okay? But what you would have seen built is practical buildings that would have served as meet points, okay? So either they were forts for functional army purpose, but before that is the Dharamsal. The Dharamsal is the original terminology, the early terminology that Guru Nanak Dev Ji implemented. You see quite a variety of terminology. So the Seva Panthis, Bhai Kanhaiya Ji, Baba Sham Singh, that lineage of very esteemed Sikh saints, used to set up something called tikane, rest houses. But in these rest houses, there'd be Gurmat Prachar. So the common theme to all of these Sikh buildings, I would say, is some element of Gurmat Prachar. Okay? Either through Sangati worship, either through scripture reading or scripture writing, or through langar. But some element of dharmic practice. That's how I would define it. Bhai Gurdas Ji actually says this, Dharamsal Kartarpur Sad Sangat Sach Khand Visaya. So, in Kartarpur, that town in West Punjab, that is now in Pakistan, where they've now opened the corridor, Guru Nanak Dev Ji established Sachkhand in the form of the Dharamsal, in the form of the Sad Sangat. So Sri Guru Nanak Dev Ji established the Dharamsal as a physical gathering place of the Sad Sangat, a place for truth seekers who are to engage in Kirtan, Katha, Seva and Simran. And as I've told you, the Sikh Gurus would go on to do this across the board. And the reason why I think this is such a big thing and why we can't diminish this, and why I think Guru Nanak Dev Ji started the institutionalization from the beginning, is because Guru Nanak Dev Ji was doing something that no other institution had ever done. We had people from Hindu and Muslim Dharam congregating to worship in one area. That had never happened. As I've told you, at Guru Nanak Dev Ji's time, Hindu and Muslim did not engage on a societal level. They had very separate ways of living. They wouldn't eat, they wouldn't share food, they would even avoid each other in commerce, mostly. So to have appeal across the board like this in one place is completely revolutionary. Same thing with gender. Women were not allowed anywhere near in the religious spaces of the Hindus, right? People like to go on about the Islamic faith, but the Hindus were equally bad in terms of how they treated women in the historical period. Obviously, even in mosques, if women are allowed to go into a mosque, they might have 2 entrances. Most of the time, they're not even allowed. So now you've got Guruji breaking barriers on interreligious strife between genders, where women aren't even allowed to listen to the Ved in any caste, right? And now suddenly they're being allowed to worship and read and sing and do the langar and do all these things. And then there's caste. So out of the 4 castes, so Brahman, Kshatriya, Vash, there's Shudra, 2 of them are not even allowed to go anywhere near the scriptures, the Vedas. The Shudras aren't allowed to listen or read, so they've got no access. And if they did, there used to be severe punishment. The Vaish could just about listen. The Kshatris were allowed to listen and study, and the Brahmins had ultimate complete power over all of it. And they were the ones who controlled it. So Guru Nanak Dev Ji comes along and destroys all of that. It's completely revolutionary. And the place they did it was the Dharamsal, right? So I would say that Dharamsal is the first institution of the Sikhs. And it is an institution. And then you go on to see that Sikh asthans go on to develop on the three core principles of Naam, Daan, Isnan. Now, some of you may not have heard this, but this is the, these days we talk about, Naam Japo, Vandke Shakrana, and Kirata Karo. These are the three principles, but they are rooted in these three principles, which actually find mention in Gurbani, Naam, Daan, Isnan. Let's talk about those for a second. So you know how I was saying to you, this is the Gurbani Pankti that backs up what I just said. Sun Galla Gur Pahe Aya, Naam, Daan, Isnan Didaya, Sab Mukta Hoa Se Sarada, Nanak Sachi Bedi Char Diyo. So, hearing of the Guru's instruction, hearing Guru Nanak Dev Ji's revolutionary message about how we can attain liberation and transform ourselves and the world we live in, I came to the Guru. Naam, Daan, Isnan Didaya. This philosophy of Naam, Daan, Isnan was instilled. And what was the result? Sab Mukta Hoa Se Sarada, Nanak Sachi Bedi Char Diyo. The Guru has put me on the boat to liberation, and as a result, I've become released of the worldly entanglements, the things that bind me to this world, Kaam, Krodh, Lobh, Ahankar, all of these vices that keep me trapped. So that's the Gurmat basis for Naam, Daan, Isnan. Now, how does Harmandir Sahib, as our Pramukh, most important Asthan, or most famous anyway, as the center of Sikh power, how does it reflect those three values? So Naam is that Shakti that Guru Maharaj has given us, that's given to us through the Panj Pyare, that is dripping in Gurbani. Naam is that Shakti that enables us to rid ourselves of the ego, the mind-body complex, and destroy the differences that we see and unite us with Vaheguru. Okay, so it's the most important thing in Sikhi, Naam. And notice how it comes first. It's always Naam, Daan, Isnan. It's never Daan, Isnan, Naam. It's always Naam first. Why? Daan is charity. Where do we see charity in the Gurdwara? We see it in the form of the langar. Okay, so every Gurdwara has a langar. That is the form of Daan. That's its practice. And then Isnan we see in the form of Sarovar. And again, I want to draw a point to this. The Guru's creating a place where there's a water body is no small thing. Once again, Hindus and Muslims will not bathe in the same place. High and low caste will not bathe in the same place. When you go to Harmandir Sahib now, you will do your Ishnan, and then you'll go to Har Ki Pauri, which is this bit. Yeah. And then you'll take Amrit from there and drink it, won't you? Can you think about how revolutionary? People that don't have any Shraddha will say, oh, that's disgusting, you're bathing in it and drinking in it, right? This, I would say, is the precursor to Khandeva Tada Amrit. This is the Amrit that people are now just drinking, where people wouldn't, the Brahmins would not even eat food if a Shudra had cast a shadow on his cooking square. This is the level of discrimination we're talking about, the level of prejudice in people's minds. I'm better than you because of the way I'm born, and you are not, and if you come near me, I'm impure. This is destroying all of that. And what we're actually talking about is the non-dual aspect of Sikhi, where Sikhi starts with Ik, Ahankar. Ik. There is only one. There is only Vaheguru. There is nothing else. So who can I be a dushmani with? Who am I supposed to hate? Who am I supposed to be in competition with? There is no me. There's only you, tu hi hai. And all of these three concepts, Naam helps us to eradicate the ego. Daan teaches us to be humble and to give to those less fortunate and to lower ourselves, right? Even Maharaja Ranjit Singh, when he did some transgression, was bound to the Imli tree in front of a Kal Takht, ready to be whipped on the orders of Akali Phula Singh. You have to submit. And then Ishanan also allows us, like I said, to break down these caste prejudices and to approach this place as equals, all seekers of the Guru's love and hukum. This is how Naam, Daan, Isnan as a trifecta, a three-part formula works, with Naam being the current that runs through. Because as I said, without Naam, if we try to do too much charity and we don't do any self-introspection through Naam, eradicate the ego, then it's very easy to think I'm a very charitable person. Otherwise, we'd all think Bill Gates is the next sant, wouldn't we? We'd all start manning him as the Brahmgyani. How much does the Gates Foundation do in the world? We can't. That's not the way it works. Equally, if we do a lot of part, or we go to the Gurdwara a lot, or we do this, that, and the other, if we don't keep our ego in check through Naam, it's a checks and balances system. You need all three. And I'd argue that the person who has done any sort of Naam Japana, Vicharam Gurbani, these lofty people that we aspire to and that we hold in esteem, people like Baba Resham Singh, Baba Nand Singh, Sant Isha Singh, these people, Sant Janal Singh, their practice then imbibes the Dan Ishnan part automatically. Have you ever come across a saintly person that doesn't do good things for people? This is the benefit of the Sikh faith. You would find Sanatan Mat sadhus who would just go and sit in a cave and do nothing for anybody else. I have yet to find that in our tradition. Most saintly people, or people who are on this path, will still go out there, they'll build hospitals, they'll run schools, they'll run langars, they will do something, because once you've sorted your inside out, then the outside automatically follows. We read this in an Ansab every day. Jio nirmal, bahar nirmal. It comes every day. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about architecture as a whole. So the reason why I spent so much time on that front part is because I wanted to show you how Sikhistans actually imbibe Gurmat ethos through their very construction. Actually, I didn't even get to the one bit that I wanted to talk about. This formula for making a Gurdwara, we've got 4 entrances, right? And people go on about this and it sounds simple. But this again is revolutionary. Hindu mandirs have only one entrance. You can only go through it one entrance, and if you're a lower caste, you can't go in. Islamic masjids have the same thing, or on some occasions 2 entrances, male and female. Here you have 4 entrances, and this importance of that can't be understated, because Guruji was creating a path that was welcoming to all people across the world. And we see this in the Guru Darbar. We see people from all walks of life. You see in the Pats, you see in the Bhagats, that Guruji embraced anybody who adopted this universal philosophy of Gurmat. And the doorway systems reflect this. And most Gurdwara in India do reflect this. Now, we can't reflect this in architecture out here because of logistical reasons. We don't have that much space. But it's important to remember, this is a unique, you won't find any other form of architecture, religious-wise, in any other faith that has this feature. This is from Rudyard Kipling's father, John Lockwood Kipling. This man was very important in saving the Indian arts at a time where the British had been in power for some time and lots of traditional art forms were being lost. I'll read it to you, it's a bit unclear. It's a bit long as well. But it's to make a point about Sikh architecture occupying its own space. So the Hindu fantasy of design, which is so noticeable in other parts of the empire, even in objects applied to Mohammedan uses, here, regarding Punjab, finds expression only in a few rude sculptures and pictures, usually from hill districts, and are entirely absent from the buildings of the plains. I'll break this down. So what he's talking about is, across most of India, you find a lot of sculptures, either naked sculptures or idols or this, that, and the other. And he's saying that in Punjab, the plains, where we're all from, so most of us are not from the hill regions where the Hill Raja were from, he's saying that the plains don't have this. He says that the sculptures that once decorated the Gandhara monasteries in Peshawar are exceptions. And he says, in an artistic sense, they are the most complete of any in India. So there are some statues in Peshawar, or there were, and they were the most complete specimens in the whole of India. But he says, but they belong to a time with which nothing now in existence in the province has any connection. And they are the work of a race which has apparently left no other traces. So what this is alluding to is that Punjab, being the gateway into India from Afghanistan and the Central Asia, where the Mughals and the Turks came from, so Mongolia, Uzbekistan, all of that, that's where they all came from, that the Islamic influence on the area has meant that there's no real idol building, and that's been the case in Punjab for a long time. And then he goes on to say the Sikhs were making a beginning towards a free Hindu edification of Mohammedan motives. Now take this with a pinch of salt. This guy was a British person speaking in 1890, where the English just perceived us as an offshoot of Hinduism. But the point he's making is still interesting, okay? That we were starting to modify what the Mohammedans, the Muslims, had done. And there's some truth to that, because if you look at Sikh architecture, Harmandir Sahib and everything, it resembles a mixture of Rajput and Mughal architecture, which makes sense because those were the predominant systems at the time. But equally, he goes on to say that when he talks about a free Hindu edification, what he means is that we put our own Indic spin on it. Because the Muslims are very fanatical. They won't paint any figures, they won't paint anything living, even birds or animals, in their artwork. If you go to any Islamic country, you'll see they're very good at doing geometry type patterns, lattice work, all of that stuff. You won't find a single living thing. And that's because in their dharam, they don't believe in idol worship, and they take it to a huge extreme, to the point where you can't even make a picture because that might turn into an idol. And they have also gone through a big thing where in Mecca and stuff, they've been the sort of extremists amongst them have been destroying libraries and houses to do with Muhammad because they're worried about people idol worshipping. So that's where their extremism leads them. But the Sikhs have started to modify this, and I think any of you who've been to Harmandir Sahib can see this, because in the marble work at Harmandir Sahib, you will see figures, and you will see birds, and you will see trees and things like this. That's a complete modification. You won't find that at Taj Mahal or anything like that. So this is how the Sikhs started to put their own stamp on buildings. And then he goes on to say their wood carving has a character of its own. Their foliage, so the trees and the vinery in that carving, is elaborately lined and twisted. And you can see small and grotesque figures, human and animal, inadmissible in Muslim work, are beginning to appear. But the essential characteristics of what may be called the official style, and then he goes on some technical terms, from the Mughal, so sort of Mughal columns and the mehrab, which are like the lattices that you see, they're still present. But it's really interesting that in the last part of the sentence, he goes on to say that the traditional, so you know the image of the mandir that I showed you at the beginning, the big conical structure sitting on top of a square base. You see them now, but at this time in Punjab, that structure was quite rare. It wasn't the traditional art form of Punjab. It's come about now because of nationalistic tendencies. But you won't find many historic mandirs that look like that. They actually look more like Sikhistans. This is from Percy Brown, writing 50 years later. The Sikh Confederacy, which attained great power in Punjab during the 18th and 19th centuries, may be defined in its religious aspect. Again, so this is Gore telling us what they think we are, not understanding, but take that with a pinch of salt. So that any buildings connected with the belief had to be so designed as to accord with its ritual and practice. What does this teach us? That even the outside Gore, who didn't really understand our faith at all, but they still understood that the Sikhs had made buildings that were specific to them and reflected their ethos and practice. What this means is that we can't just think of Gurdwara as nice, fluffy buildings that look okay and that's great. They are deliberate manifestations of Gurmat philosophy, which our ancestors thought about before they made them, okay? And which was started by Guru Nanak Dev Ji themselves, okay? And I think this is my reading of it. People can disagree, but this is how I feel about it. Because I personally believe, as I said at the beginning, Guru Nanak Dev Ji ripped down extremist external behaviors, taught us to reorient the internal. But when we were faced with oppression, and when that message was facing oppression through the Mughals, and Guru Arjan Dev Ji was made Shaheed, our system had to find a way to exist in a physical world, in a place where we need to defend ourselves. Because if you don't, then what happens? Fast forward 100 years later, you get to the Shahidi Guru Tegh Bahadur, where no one stood up to claim Guruji's cease and body, only 2 people. And that we hear that story all the time, don't we? At that point, Guruji said, I'm going to make sparrows into hawks, right? Because it's all well and good having an internal philosophy. If that internal philosophy isn't tested, isn't practiced, isn't put in a crucible, then people just willy-nilly throw it away by the wayside when it suits them, right? And coming back to my point about attachment to the Guru, right? Bhai Jetha risked his life to secure the cease of Guru Tegh Bahadur after the Shahidi and bring it back to Nandpur. If we take this whole thing of there's no attachment to the world, it's all physical, it's all impermanent, why did he do that? Because then you could say, oh, it's just a cease. Has anyone ever said that? No. So we have to think, where does our logic take us? Hanji Pani, you got a question? Yeah, I agree with that completely. So the Gurus didn't just sit in one place. They did move each time the new Guru was allocated or appointed after the previous Guru had done Akal Chalana. But it's interesting as well because sometimes where we sometimes look at that history, it's because previous Guru families weren't always welcoming and things like that were happening. So for example, the sons of Guru Angad Dev Ji didn't accept Guru Amar Das, and then the sons of Guru Amar Das didn't accept Guru Ram Das easily, and then later there were reconciliations. But the point being is that each Guru then went on to establish something on their own, still having a route back. And like I said, people like to throw out, well, Guru Gobind Singh Ji never went to Darbar Sahib, Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji was refused entry by corrupt Mahants. All of that is true, but then it's the same Guru Gobind Singh Ji that told Baba Banda Singh to liberate Sirhind and build Fatehgarh. We can't take one action and then extrapolate it across the board and say, this is exactly how we need to do it. We have to take each thing case by case. I would argue now we're at a point where the Sikh Raja took over and finally managed to establish a permanent Sikh civilization. These Asthans tell our story as a Sikh civilization. When you go and look at any other culture, any world culture, Christians, all their denominations, all 100 of them, the Muslims, all of these people, even the Egyptians, right? Nobody practices that stuff, and we've still got the pyramids, and we know so much about them and their culture, and there are experts trained in it, right? And we as Sikhs have to realize that these Astham, our creative arts, painting, music, all of this stuff is expression of the soul, but it's also how outside communities engage with us, right? You may not read about Christian theology. I do just out of interest, but most people won't. But a lot of people will still go to the Sistine Chapel because it's beautiful, right? Nowadays, you see YouTube is full of Western bloggers going to Harmandir Sahib, right? Why do they go to Harmandir Sahib? It's not because they probably read about Sikhi most of the time, it's because it looks nice. And then they hear about the langar. Our cultural and artistic expression is how we deal not only with our own atma and our expression of our devotion, but it's also how the rest of the world interacts with us. And when we think about how Guru Nanak Dev Ji started Sikhi, it was through Kirtan, a creative expression. It wasn't through boring lectures like this. Yeah? It was about an emotive expression of Gurmat, which was able to talk across languages, across cultures. Right? Think about the expanse of people that Guruji spoke to: Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, southern India, Tibet, Nepal. I mean, 100 languages across that expanse? And Guruji was able to communicate with all of them and create sangats in all of them. Why? Because creative expression and medium has a way of being universally transcendent. And I would argue that architecture forms part of that. I'll speed up. A bit more of the examples though. So here, you can't see, it's a bit unclear, but up there in the gold is a relief of Guru Nanak Dev Ji by Bala and by Mardana. You can see it, it's still there today. You can see in the marble work here, there are figurines. But this is just to point to those comments earlier that I read to you. About the finesse of woodwork. So this is a gateway that was in Lahore, and this sketch was made by Resham Singh, who was a famous Sikh architect in the early 1900s, who designed Gurdwara Saragadi and even, I think, the Darbar room in the Isle of Wight. He was a master architect, really well worshipped by the British and Lockwood Kipling. But this is just to show you the finesse of the woodwork that the British were talking about, that the Sikhs had achieved. And this is a Sikh carpenter from 1870. So the reason why I show all of this is that our ancestors, our forefathers, the mothers of previous years went through so much struggle to make these sites, to maintain the history of the Sikhs and the Sikh personalities that came after, and then made beautiful asthans that would attract people, and out of their own devotion. This man would have spent the best part of his life learning to do this craft, much like we do today. We're not so hands-on. We're working in boring, apart from Isha Singh, working in boring professions. But, you know, our ancestors would have slaved away for years to make a doorway like that. And to think that they would then give that as beta. Right? Nowadays, you go on, you watch the PTC live, and someone will bring a gold bowl and give beta Darbar Sahib, and everyone will go, fantastic, Chakara Chaddo, wonderful, right? But if you go to rural Punjab now in the pins, you'll still see like farming families bringing a small vat of ghee or dud or dahi, and they go and put it in a communal thing into the langar. What I'm saying is, all of this is like the expression of the soul of devotion of many Sikhs towards their guru and their sangat. And by creating things of beauty like this is an expression of that devotion. How do you show love to someone, right? Now, I've got a way, I don't do Valentine's Day, but some of you might do. But birthdays and things come up, right? And I know that if I make something for my wife, she appreciates it more than if I go to Clinton's and buy a £5 overpriced card. Yeah? It's similar here. If you make something with your heart, it doesn't even have to be good, but you make it with sincerity, that holds a lot more value than shop or cheap, lack of interest, cheapskate routes and cutting corners. I want to now focus on one other element of Sikh architecture. Now, this is a drawing made by a friend of mine who's a carpenter. Sorry, it's a bit difficult to see. But the point I want to make is that even these domes that you see upon Gurdwara, they're actually modeled on lotus flowers. And what you can see there is he's turned the leaves of the dome into a CAD drawing, and it looks like a blossoming flower. And we just look at these things now and think, oh, that looks nice, and the Sikhs like to make domes, and their domes look like this, and chalo gal khatam. But it's not true, because the lotus flower in Sikhi inhabits a very special place as a metaphor that's given constantly about how Sikhs live their lives. The Sikhs should be like the lotus flower that lives within a mucky pond, because the lotus flower is able to float on a dirty pond and it remains unaffected by it. The analogy being that as good Sikhs, we live in the world, but we are not subject to its attachments, and we are free of it. But we're not divorced from it. It's a perfect example, and it finds expression. And these domes have this expression. And in fact, in Gurbani, it talks about this as well. Sorry, I don't know why it keeps playing. In Gurbani, it talks about this. That actually these domes are inverted lotuses. And through Brahm Vichar, through Gurbani contemplation, the lotus has been turned the right way. And when it gets turned the right way, it's receptive to Amrit that descends from the Dasavdar. Now, this is a bit complex if you don't know these concepts, but what it's trying to get down to the point of is that a lotus that is orientated to the world can't receive the nectar of Naam, which drips down when you do the introspection and you do the meditative practice and you reflect on Gurbani, that then opens your Dasam Dar, which is located in the crown of your head. So this is a Bhangati that's talking about the spiritual development of the Sikh, about reorientating yourself through Naam, Simran, Seva, Bhakti, being receptive and opening the Dasam Dar from which the inner Amrit comes to descend. And these domes reflect that journey. So it's not just a simple case of, I like domes and it's gold, let me just plonk one on top. The whole Gurdwara is reflecting the inner journey of a Sikh, that when you go there, this is what you should be doing. And this Gurdwara has got domes. When you think about it, this Gurdwara is the lotus. Satul's Gandh, this is the lotus. Maibani Jana, I want to be in here, right? Maya Uthea, I go down there, I can see 100 types of Kaljog. Ethiyake, I can find Satjog, I can find Sachkhand. This is how we should think. Right, so that's a long preamble about why architecture is important, how architecture embodies Sikh ethos, and why we need to study Sikh architecture to a much higher level to understand how our ancestors translated Gurmat principles into a working astan that helps you to understand your own metaphysics, your own philosophy, and how we can then apply that to ourselves and apply it to the world. I told you it was going to be about beyond bricks and mortar, not just about buildings, but now I'm going to go on about buildings. Anyone seen this picture before? This is the original house of Bibi Nanki Ji that was identified in 1970 by Bibi Jaswant Kaur of Birmingham. There's a Bibi Nanki Gurdwara up in Birmingham. She was a very well-regarded saint. Most of the older generation will know about what she did for the Panth. But through her Kamai, she found this site, which was not known. Now, I asked you a question about are there any standing asthans that relate from the Guru period time. Here's one, but unfortunately it's been turned into this. So, Baji, you were asking me about, were they always Gurdwara, were they always Dharamsals? Now, obviously Bibiji's Kar was where she resided with Bhai Jairam. But equally, I would argue it was both things. It was a residence. But if anybody's read Sri Nanak Prakash or the Janamsakhis, you know that Guru Nanak Dev Ji spent a lot of time with Bibi Nanki Ji and was constantly called there because of Bibi Nanki Ji's Shraddha. Bibi Nanki Ji enjoys the status as the first Sikh because she was the first person to identify Guruji's divinity in childhood. So I always felt that if we had been able to maintain this, and I know it was in a bad state, but it was founded in 1970, not 1920, okay? There were still ways to preserve this. We could have been in a place where Guru Nanak Dev Ji, in the very room where Bibi Ji had prepared langar for them, where Maharaj had sat, where they'd sung Kirtan, where they'd reassured Bhai Jairam with all his flustering about Modi Khana de vich kata pya, all of that, all the Sakhis that we know. Now this is still the same place, but because it doesn't have any antiquity to it at all, it's harder to relate to that story, isn't it? You can't say this is the room. You can say this is the spot, you can't say this is the room. And it also doesn't look like what was there before, it looks like everything else we see across Punjab. So now we don't really have a distinction between residence, fort, garrison, stable, everything looks the same. This is a very small building called Dukh Nivaran Julna Mahal. And actually, according to Gurmeet Rai, who's our head conservation architect working on our projects, is an original building dating from Guru Arjan Dev Ji's time, so 1500s, at Thatte Kera in Tarn Taran. And it's on the bank of a sarovar that Guruji made. Notice the dome shape and the way it looks. Again, it's got 4 entrances, no surprise. But a very interesting low-fluted dome, that's similar to what you see on Sri Harmandir side. Unfortunately, this has been clad in marble and sort of altered, so you can't see it like that now. But it was like this a few years ago. So where are we today? We've got a problem. We've got a problem because either we're doing things like this, where original asthans are just being turned into a very simple, same formula. Ikko jay lagde ya, there's no diversity. Koi lagta nahi hai, it's all ikko jay banata, and there you go. That's seva done. Or this is happening. This is a bit more outside of our control because this is Gurdwara Rodi Sahib in Pakistan. This is where Guru Nanak Dev Ji used to spend time with their Nanke. This is their parent, the Nanka parent, so the maternal family. Now this Gurdwara was in okay condition, but over the years, because obviously there's no Sikh Sangat there, they all left in partition, this is what's happened to it. Now these buildings, when I talk about Sikhistan, why are they important? Why do we need to maintain the historical buildings? This building is gone now. Without the internet or without Suraj Prakash, where the history of this place is recorded, the historical stories to do with Guru Nanak Dev Ji would be lost. Because there's nobody, when you go to Punjab now, the Indian side, koi bhi pind jao, there will be some bujurg there who can tell you the itihas. Ja granthi thanu dasuga. there's living memory of the place, and people sina bisina babaniya kahaniya put karende they ansar. That's what they do. You hear the stories, right? But the Sangatan that were here have been booted out more than 70, 80 years ago, and now this building and the story and the memories that it maintained is lost. And if we as a community don't start to look at these things, make records, study them, the record keeping is very important, then people will start to say the Guru Nanak Ji never went there. Because that's going to be complete rubble. It will just be bricks in a few years. The rest of it will fall. There's nothing to save now. And then you start to see how Sikh history starts to get changed, warped. Other communities start to infringe on those places. And this is happening in both India and Pakistan. And the best part, and like I said, I think there's at least 300 to 400 Gurdwara in Pakistan. And only maybe 20 of those are under the Pakistani Evacuation Trust Board and maintained as actual Gurdwara. The rest of them are like this. Now, this one's in Pakistan. It's in Dera Chahal. Guru Nanak Dev ji sambandh hai. One of the Nanak Parivar ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜਿਆ ਹੈ. This is the original, well, at least an old photo of what was built at Anandpur Sahib. Now, Anandpur Sahib went through a lot of changes. The Mughals did destroy a lot of the original fort, but this was what was reconstructed by the descendants of Guru Hargobind, Gulab Rai and Darshan Das, the people who maintained Anandpur Sahib after the evacuation. This was what was rebuilt. And this is the closest thing we're ever going to get to what it was like before. And it has a lot of similar features to Puratan other buildings, right? And it looks a lot more like, you can see here, up here, is a watchtower. And you can see how you might have had a guard there looking out, how this place must have been a lot harder to penetrate than what's there now. If you've ever been to Anandpur now, it's just a big white Gurdwara. It doesn't look like this at all. All these trees are gone. You can't really appreciate how indefensible this, about how well defensible this place was. And Bhai Jeevanpal Singh, who's one of our trustees, he made a point about this on the podcast that we did recently, that Bhai Khan Singh Nabba and Mahan Kosh made a note of the fact that there were gulliyan or alleyways underneath where the Singhs were going in and out during the jungs here, right? All of those have been blocked off. So the people that did all of this, the Gharse of Allah, they had good reason to. Anandpur Sahib was in bad state by the time they replaced it. Perhaps they didn't have the means to change it or repair the building as it was. But our argument is we do now. And whatever we have left, we should try and keep it as it was, because by not doing so, we are not maintaining accurate history. And we are now living in an age where the youth are more skeptical about everything. People don't believe anything that they read, right? People will look at Anandpur Sahib now and say, well, how could that history happen here? People will look at Chamkaur and say, how could 1 million people fight against 40 here? This is how doubt, this is how skepticism, this is how disbelief creeps in. And the reason why the Gore and other cultures, right, we know so much about their history. Stuff that I don't even care about, I know about, because they maintained it, right? You know everything about Henry VIII, you know everything about Elizabeth, her dad, you know where she lived, you know where she got married. Sab kuch pata hai inhan de bare. And I don't care about them. But if you look at all of this, right, I've only found this stuff out because I've had to research it and now I'm interested in it. And even that, it's only the bare bones of what we can find because the historical record hasn't been kept. And even when they did this seva, it would have been good for them to keep that historical record, but it wasn't kept. So now, when we go there, it's unrecoverable. And we've lost that chunk of history. And the big problem that's set in has been over the last 100 years. Go back to the timeline that I sent you, that I set out for you. Fatehgarh Sahib, Baba Banda Singh erects a very small memorial, and then he is subsequently captured and tortured to death in a very barbaric way. And that was established in 1710. This building was built by Maharaja Karam Singh of Patiala in 1843, so over 130 years later, once the Sikhs have got power. But can you see how, look at the dome shape. That dome looks almost identical to this building I showed you, right? So it has an element of taking inspiration of buildings that are of subsequent age. And it's got the 4-door entrance. It's set up for the acoustics of Kirtan. It's been built in a very beautiful way. If you go to Fatehgarh Sahib now, it doesn't look like this at all. It's a double-story structure with a gold dome on top. The dome shape is completely changed. And I would argue that, yes, Sangat need to go there, but what you've replaced it with has lost the character of the original place, and it doesn't connect with what I just showed you, where Guruji started with stuff like this. You can't see this dome shape very much in Sikh architecture. It's been completely eradicated. This is Todar Mal's Haveli. Now, Todar Mal is the person who paid all that money to secure the site to do the cremations of the Chote Sahibzade in Sirhind. They say that this is the land, the most expensive land in the world, because he had to cover the ground in gold mora. And this is the state of it. Now, SGPC started to do a little bit, but the point being is that a lot of people don't know that Toda Mal, because he did this, he actually, after this, was made Shaheed himself. His whole family, he, his wife and 2 children, were put into grounding presses and crushed to death afterwards. So this is someone that not only gave all his wealth, he gave his life, his family and everything for the Gurukar. And this is the place where he resided. And this is the state of it. So the point being is, I only know this stuff because I went to look at this building, and this building reminds me of Toda Mal. I'm trying to demonstrate this point. Where buildings start to fall down, the memories of the people they're associated with quickly disappear. And then we lose history. And that's the case for 2 of the asthans that we're going to talk to you about the work we're doing. This is Muktsar Sahib. This is Muktsar Sahib in 1913, and I appreciate this is not a great picture. This is Muktsar Sahib now, covered in marble. The original structure is somewhat standing, but we've lost all of this intricacy, all these kiosks, all these balconies. You can't see because the pixelation is bad. There are actually frescoes of Sikh warriors here, because Muktsar is where the Jali Mukti attained Shahidi. So on the original building, each of these panels had a fresco of a Sikh Surma, a warrior, right? None of that is there now. It's just turned into quite a sterile-looking marble-clad building. All of this intricacy is gone. You know those geometric patterns I was telling you about that the Sikhs adopted from the Muslims? Here they are. You see them actually dotted around Sikhistans of old antiquity. Here's that low, flat roof I was telling you about, but then here's the lotus-shaped dome as well. So all these features are present in this Gurdwara. And this Gurdwara was built, and the foundation stone was laid in the sort of 1820s by the Maharaja Kaithal by Uday Singh, who was another Sikh king. So yes, fine, it's not from the Guru period, but my point on this is we struggle to find a lot from the Guru period because a lot of it wasn't maintained and a lot of it was destroyed. But I would argue that our ancestors had a closer relation to the architecture of that time than we do now. And by turning this into that, by putting marble on it, what have we gained? I would say we've lost quality, we've lost character, we've lost expression of Gurmat, and turned it into a Gurdwara that looks actually like everything else, where it had all of this before. What was the need to turn it from that to that? What have we gained by doing that? These are the questions we have to ask ourselves. Now, this is my favorite picture to show how the Sikhs have not, as a community, we have not respected what our elders did. This gach work, so this inlay work with gold, would have taken years to put up. It would have been the hard work of devoted Sikhs who had trained all their lives to beautify a place, to make, this is Baba Atal Rai. This is Baba Atal Rai, Gurdwara, the 9-storied Gurdwara in Amritsar. Baba Atal being Guru Har Govind's son, and the 5th son of Guru Har Gobind, Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji's elder brother, who died at a tender age. They put these horrible green tiles on there. I don't know what possessed them to do it. And as a result, I haven't included them in this presentation, I can send them to you. But in Baba Atal, there used to be frescoes depicting the Battle of Muktsar. There used to be frescoes showing the darbar of each Guru. So there is a fresco, and I have a picture of it, showing Guru Tegh Bahadur and Guru Gobind Singh Ji together, receiving the Kashmiri Pandits. There's a fresco showing Guru Har Krishna in darbar. I haven't seen a fresco like that anywhere else, because there's very little depictions of Guru Har Krishna anywhere. Obviously, their Guruship was only a couple of years, so there's not that much. But that's gone. There was also the depicted lineage of Baba Buddha Ji. Now, most people don't know that Baba Buddha Ji had a lineage, but it's there, and their names are recorded. That's gone, and that was all gone underneath these tiles. So I'd ask the question, a lot of people get upset about seeing imagery and stuff, but all I see on social media these days, amongst the Sikhs, amongst people that care, are the frescoes of Baba Atal. Every time there's a Gurpurb, someone posts a picture from those frescoes, right? And I think we need to reflect on why that's important. Those frescoes, this beautification work, went on in the early 1900s. And you have to ask yourself why. Now, in my research, I figured out that the earliest Sikh frescoes date to just after 10 years after Guru Gobind Singh Ji, and they used to be in a samad of Bhai Dalla Ji. If you go to Damdama Sahib, Bhai Dalla Ji was the one who hosted Guru Gobind Singh Ji, and pretty much there's like 10 Gurdwara named after Bhai Dalla Ji in that area. He had a samad there, it's not there anymore. And it was covered in very old style frescoes. And that's some of the earliest examples. But why did the Sikhs then go on a mass painting campaign? Why did they beautify Baba Atal? Why did they beautify Goindwan Sahib with Sakhis of the Janamsakhi? Do you know in the late 1800s, the British were on a missionary zeal. They were starting to convert Sikhs to Christianity en masse. What we're seeing now, actually, was going on then. There was a massive hoo-ha when 4 Sikh children were publicly about to convert to Christianity. At this point, you see Bhai Veer Singh and people like that, and Singh Sabha, starting to produce literature for the ease of the public. Because up until this point, everything was taught in Ladivar, everything was taught in Dere, which was an important tradition to maintain. But in order to make everything accessible, they started publishing where the words are separated in Badshed, they started publishing in newspapers, and they started painting Janamsakhis. Why? Because, well, let me show you why. This is Goindwal. This structure is still there. None of these frescoes are there anymore. All of this was covered in marble. These ones were showing the 10 gurus, but I'll show you what they've done to those in a minute. Now, through my research, I managed to find this. This is one of the frescoes from this portion. So that's Guru Amar Das sitting there. Bauli Sahib is associated with Guru Amar Das. And there's an emperor sitting in front. Does anybody know the Sakhi this is referring to? Do you know? Anyone? Anji? Akbar, yeah? So the famous Sakhi that this alludes to is that Akbar came to meet Guru Amar Das. And what did Guru Amar Das say? Pehla Pangat, Ver Sangat. So you have to eat in the langar first, and then you can come into Sangat. The point being, though, is that whoever made this, they made if you go to Babartal, you can still see the frescoes. They've been altered, but they're there. Some of them on the first floor, Guru Nanak Dev Ji's Janamsakhi. But it allows us to, especially people that haven't read or didn't have the chance to read, and there were a lot of them in Punjab in the early 1900s, because the education system fell flat after the Sikh Empire. It allowed them to engage with this history in a very easy visual way, right? If I have to sit a child down, and we should still do this, by the way, and take them through the whole Janamsakhi, and I'm planning to do it with my 1-year-old later, once he's old enough, I can do that. But right now I can show him this picture, and I do. I show him this picture, and he goes, Guruji, this is how we build connection. I'm not teaching him to worship the picture. When Sikhs have enough buddhi, this is the point, we're supposed to have vivek buddhi, right? That we know a picture is not guru, right? It's not the whole personality of the guru is not in a picture. But these are tools for us to teach history and to engage children and to engage not just children, ourselves. I look at this, it reminds me of the history, it brings the lessons to me, and I think about it. Hanji Padi. Yeah, exactly. You know, I've seen the same thing in Thailand. They have massive murals of the Ramayana and Mahabharata, and it tells the whole story. You don't have to sit there for 10 years trying to study Sanskrit to figure out what's going on. Yeah, same there. For the video, Baji's talking about how in Cambodia and Thailand and places like this, you have depictions of whole Hindu epics. My point being, though, you've got a mass conversion movement going on. Your population is getting disengaged with Sikhi and Gurmat. What do? You make it more accessible, you publish literature like Bhai Veer Singh, you make images like this, and you teach the history. And this is what they did. This no longer exists. This is, again, from Goindwal. This is from my research. Around the corner, there were frescoes. This is on that side. I have other images that I can take you through another time. So that's Guru Amar Das, and this is Guru Amar Das Ji's daughter. Anyone know the Sakhi? Yeah. So this is the Sakhi where Guruji was in Samadhi, in meditation, and the platform, the takat they were sitting on, one of the legs was loose, and Bibiji put their thumb underneath to stabilize it. And, obviously that caused a lot of damage. And Guruji, seeing that, then asked Bibiji, how can I reward your seva? And that was when Bibiji then said, may the Guruship stay in the family lineage. And that was the how. Then from that point onwards, the Guruship then went into the Sodhi lineage. From there, from Guru Ram Das onwards. Again, so you can see how it's an age-old adage, an image tells 1,000 words, right? You're trying to engage a population. So you can say that the Bauli Sahib had the Janamsakhi of Guru Amar Das Ji for us. But now it's all gone. All these frescoes are gone. And this is what they've done to what was there before. So I told you the top line had the 10 gurus. This is obviously Guru Angad Dev Ji, and this is Guru Tegh Bahadur. And they were recently, they paid for them to be redone. Now, I'm biased, I have feelings about this, but I'm sorry, this is nowhere near as good as that. They have completely ruined them. I think the bottom ones look like cartoons done by a child, right? When they look like that, and they still look like that, these were photographed recently, obviously look at the resolution. What was the need to turn this into this? What have you gained? You've ruined the dedication of the artist who made it, who must have labored over this for years. You've taken all the detail away. Look at the detail that was in the Gaddi here compared to what this is. And I don't mean to be critical of the artist. They've done a job, right? My point being, though, is we as Sikhs have to reflect. What are we doing to our own places of worship, and why are we doing it? And what purpose does it serve? Once again, you've removed the historical antiquity of something, and when our children go to look at these things, they think, None of this is more than 50 years old. What is this? And it's not even done well. This is my point. A lot of the groups that you talk to that engage in this work, they say, nahi seva karni chahiye, and we need to make new structures, there's sona charonaya, and it should be done this way. And I don't disagree. Do seva, but no one can convince me until I die that that is better quality than that, right? So you want to do seva, at least do it better quality, right? Go back to Muqsad. You want to do seva, do that. Don't do that. That's my point. So no one's saying seva na karo, keep everything old, everything's broken, leave it like that. But if you're going to do seva, at least we have the methods. There's certainly the money. The SGPC has the budget. Let's not kid ourselves. The Sikhs are the second most wealthy community in this country. They have a huge budget. I don't think we are spending it in the right way. Antipati. Yeah. This is mainly made of brick and mortar, and then it's covered in something called stucco, which is lime plaster. And that's how they get the intricacy, right? Again, because of the projector, I can't show you, but this is all carved into leaves, right? And this is actually a vidya that's across the world. So even in Italy, when you go and see carved statues or carved buildings, it's the same process. It's called stucco work. You could STUCCO. You can look it up online, but it allows you to make intricate work like this. But one of the key features of Punjabi architecture, Sikh architecture, are these sorts of structures made out of brick, where the bricks have been intricately shaped, bearing in mind without power tools at this stage, to make shapes like this. And all these domes and things were made out of brick. Obviously now they're made out of sheet metal and cement, which again is not a great medium for these things. Cement is not a versatile thing that can be shaped into nice things, so it's a botched job, really. Yep. It's a good question. I've tried to find the answer, but like I said, historical record isn't kept that well. I can only go by where these groups have ended up now. So again, I don't like that this happened, but this happened 50, 60 years ago. I can't really do much about it, nor can I understand it. What I can do is look at what's happening now. And where there's been a lot of controversy recently because certain Guard Seva groups tried to dismantle the Diori at Taran, and that kicked off a whole panga that the SGPC then had to reverse themselves on. There was the finding of the Gyani Bunga Harmandir Sahib underground, which has now ended up in a car park. And they wanted to get rid of it, but the Archaeological Survey of India didn't allow them to, because legally they had jurisdiction on it. So my point being is, I'm using these examples to show, Tika, historically, this is what happened, and we have lost. Whatever their rationale is, we've lost something. But what we're doing now, there doesn't seem to me be a rationality. It's indefensible, in a way. Hanji Paji. No, I think where the Guard Seva movement started, and we went through this on the Basics podcast, so you can watch it after in detail. The Guard Seva movement started out with really good intentions. Like I said, Anandpur Sahib was falling down. The originators of Guard Seva, Baba Resham Singh, Baba Gurmukh Singh Patiala, are people I hold in very high regard. They started the movement when Santokh Sar, one of the 5 sarovars in Amritsar, was going to get filled in by the British because it becomes stagnant. And people were washing their kapde in it, and it had become moldy, and it was actually causing disease. And the British Municipal Council, during colonial times, were actually going to fill it in. So we were going to lose one of the Panj Itihasik Sarovar of Amritsar. At that point, Baba Resham Singh, Baba Gurmukh Singh galvanized the Sangat and started the seva to rejuvenate the place and made the tank pakka by putting bricks, cleaned it out and saved it. Great intentions, saving buildings where things were falling down as per the knowledge of the time. My problem is, in the last 50 to 60 years, they have started to do this to buildings that didn't require it, like the ones I've shown you. I mean, there's no justification what happened at Babbartal, even at Goindwal, at Muqsar. So where the movement has started out and where they are today, I would say there's a gulf between them. But we need to change our mindset. So a lot of our... Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So the Bunge were destroyed. Yeah. I don't think at the beginning it was conspiracy. There you go. I agree. This is what I mean by sterilizing everything and turning it one, the feeling's lost. It doesn't reflect what happened there. This is by Taru Singh's Shaheed Ganj. Sorry, again, it's much better on my laptop. I'll show you after. This site has been contested for almost 100 years. The Muslims have tried to claim this as a mosque, as a Sufi dargah. So this is where Bhai Taru Singh, whose portrait is hanging up there, where their khopri was taken, right? And the Sikhs, Maharaj Ranjit Singh, they built this small samad there. This building with a green dome, can you see how it looks pretty much like a Sikhistan, right? It's got these openings here and it's got the dome, right? It's gone green now and they've turned it into a mosque. That was an original, as far as I've seen in the records, an original part of the Sikhistan. Where we don't maintain historical record, imagery, even drawings of Sikhistan, this is what happens. especially in areas where we've got no control. Now, in Pakistan, we're like less than 1%. There's like 5,000 Sikhs or something like that, something ridiculous. Yeah, nothing, right? And they are, like I said, 60-70% of our heritage is stuck there. So
What are you doing in India?
exactly.
Why did you leave?
Well,
Everything
yeah,
is there.
yeah, precisely. We got screwed, Anjapati. But Papaji, what you're talking about is in the last 70 years, on both sides of the border, everybody's attitudes have hardened, right? At the time before partition, before all the communal riots and everything, yes, we had a lot of checkered history with all these people, but these sites were maintained by Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and there were a lot of Muslims that had Shraddha there. Even now, there's a guy called Khoj Punjab on Instagram. He's a Muslim. He's been instrumental in reviving Bhai Mani Singh's Shaheedistan. And on his Instagram, he shows that building has actually been consumed by residential buildings, but he has maintained the building inside. He goes and does full Andivarkha every Shahidi Purb. He's maintained that jaga for us. So it's never a case that one community is this, one community is that. But the point being is, though, people like him are rare. Equally, on our side of the border, our attitudes have hardened as well. Yeah, we're quite kattar.
We go to Pakistan, they say welcome.
Yeah,
You come from there, they say first line of defense.
that's right. That's right. I need to speed up because I talk a lot. So if you guys need to leave, I'm sorry, but I'll keep moving. When I was talking about devotion of people, does anyone know who this is? This is by Gyan Singh Nakash. He worked on Harmandir Sahib for 32 years painting it. He is responsible for this. Anyone who's been to the first floor of Harmandir Sahib, in the archways, you will see these frescoes, and they have the Panditiyan from Sukhmani Sahib in the middle. He painted this. He spent 30 years doing it. He comes from a lineage of painters. When he retired, he received a Sirupa from the SGPC, which in those days was a big deal. It's not like today, because someone turns up and they just give you whatever. In those days, the Sirupa had a lot of meaning. They didn't just give it out. And he wrote this letter of thanks, and you can see it's got all the same artistic features as the floral work at Baba Tal and Darbar Sahib. And it basically says, okay, look, it says Das Gyan Singh Nakash, and it's dated 49 in the Christian calendar, right? And he's basically thanking the SGPC for giving him the seva. But do you know the sad story of Gyan Singh Nakash? 30 years doing this seva, he didn't get paid enough. He ended up leaving it at the end in his old age, at this age, and painting toys to make a living. This is in the this is us. But the gurus gave patronage to all artistic art forms, right? We have paintings of the gurus in the Bhai Rupa collection, Bhai Bidhi Chand collection of the gurus. Even Dr. Trilochan Singh found that portrait of Guru Tegh Bahadur in Assam that you can find in his book. The gurus, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, you had Satnam Singh here a couple of months ago from Denmark, who's released that book. And he talked to you all about how much time and effort Guruji put into establishing a Kavi Darbar and giving patronage to writers. Where have we gone wrong as a community that we don't put money into writers and scholars and people who can scribe Gurbani, people who can sing Gurbani in Rag, people who can decorate buildings properly, carpenters, painters? Because the Guru Darbar did, and the Sikh Maharaja did. So what went wrong in the 100 years that since we've gained independence from the British? I would say that in that colonial period, something infected our mindset, and that infection has continued since into the modern era. Because our ancestors didn't do this. I haven't included it in this talk, but the Baba Deep Singh Sarup at Amritsar, that they do Prakash 4 times a year in the Jalal at Darbar Sahib, shows extensive repair work. People that know how to do Poti Seva, rewriting, rebinding, almost Tipex, right? The Sikhs of the past knew how to look after something and repair it when it needed repairing. They didn't just rip things down willy-nilly, because we didn't have money, we didn't have time, and things were scarce. Before the printing press, Guru Granth Sahib Sarups were in the minority. We used to do Shastar Prakash. There are old photos of Bangla Sahib, Fatehgarh Sahib, where the only Prakash you can see is Shastar Prakash, because to write a full-scale Sarup of Guru Granth Sahib takes 4 or 5 years for a scribe to do. Not like now, where you just go to Chattar Singh, Jeevan Singh, and they've got Sarups just on the floor, poor quality paper, poor quality binding, and we wonder why the Qawm is where it is. I bring these other things in because this heritage is part of a wider narrative of cultural decline that the Sikhs have been through. Hanji Bhai. Maya is the underlying, I agree. And you know what, shall I tell you, the inspiration for our charity came from a different charity that operates in Hyderabad. It's called the Deccan Heritage Foundation. It's entirely run by academic Gore, because like I said, in every other culture, Rajput, Mughal, you will find about 1 million Gore who are experts in it. Sikh architecture we haven't got experts from our own community, let alone other communities. And they started that charity through non-resident Indian people giving money and then having the expertise to restore it. And they've done some pretty next level work in Hyderabad and the Deccan Desh down south. But like you say, it speaks to the point that in India, and you can't blame India, right? I'm not getting into politics, but I'll just tell you from some things that I learned recently. India had to devalue the rupee to join the world economy, right? Where the rupee during the Mughal period and the Misl period and the Sikh Raj period was worth more than the British pound, these lot stole $1 trillion from India, ripped all the resources away, took all the spice, all the gold, all the maya, and then when they were done with us, they devalued our currency, such now that the pound is worth 100 rupees. So can you see how at one point, at the height of the Mughal Empire, they say 1/3 to 1/4 of the world's GDP was running through India. And now we don't even have municipal rubbish collection in most cities. So it's not entirely our fault. But the point is now there's 2.5 million Sikhs sitting outside of India. And we're very affluent. That's the truth. Do we give daswand? Do we give 10% of our money into Sikh uprale to feed the panth and revive ourselves? I don't know. Only you guys can answer that question. My gut feel is that I don't think the community does. And this is why we established this charity. So I didn't just come here to whine or tell you a story. I agree. The Sikh Kaum has to do everything. The Gurus did everything, right? Where they built Gurdwara, they ran langars and they ran education. It wasn't one thing or the other. And the Kaum has to get better at doing all of these things. Education, heritage preservation, language instruction, study in all fields. It can't just be one thing or the other. And like I said, I think the community has enough money to do it all. But it's about building the institutions and having the right motivations. The reason why we did start this is because we couldn't see that anybody else was going to do it. And we were at the point now that I'm now struggling to find examples to show you of things that have any heritage or value to them. That's a very dire strait. And at that point, because people do say to me all the time, oh, you should put the money into langar or into education. And I'm like, yes, but there's many charities doing those things too. I can't really think of any other ones that are doing what this work is that's being done. Antipati. You're asking questions that I don't have answers to. They're very good questions, but my answer would be this. Now, it's a debate. It's a question that needs to be raised, right? What's my hope for setting up this charity? And I'll show you the work we're doing now in the next 10 minutes before I wrap up. My hope is that by actually executing projects of conservation, showing because a lot of people in India don't know what conservation is, or that you can even save a building that looks like it's about to fall down. They've never seen it happen. We've grown up here, we can see a church that's 1,000 years old quite easily. Sanu Pataya, we've seen it happen. My hope is that by showing and creating an appetite to do project after project, save the Astana, that we make a cultural change across the whole Panth. We show the Indian-based Sangat that this is what needs to happen, and it creates a pressure. Otherwise, I'm just a random Singh from East London, coming here to talk to you guys from Southall. To be honest, I never thought we'd even get a charity like this set up, and the doors opened, and people with the right mindset, and we were able to come together with them, and it's caused this, right? But what you're talking about is the Panth as a whole. And the Panth as a whole has got a lot of work to do to be able to even come to a table where that could be discussed. But in the meantime, we have to, like Bhai Gurdas Singh did with Basics, that operates very well here, we start to make micro efforts to change the cultural narrative and the cultural norms and the way we think about stuff. And then that creates a lead, right? That's how grassroots movements start. You have to make a change, and you have to educate, and you have to start to change perspectives. Because there's no, you know what? Karamveer was with me. In my other work, I went to the Central Sikh Reference Library, and I went to Guru Nanak Dev Ji University, and all I wanted to see was one saroop. Main kuch khoj karna sikha. And what Guru Nanak Dev Ji University said to me was, you're not a Sikh studies professor or Sikh studies student, because I'm a medic. That's what I do for a job. This is all my own stuff, my own passion, and my sharda, that I do all of this other stuff. They said to me, oh, you're not in the field, so we're not going to show you anything. And I said to him, what kind of backward thinking is that? In this country, a bin man can go and see Oxford Museum and access any library. It doesn't matter. Koi anpad bhi hove, they can access. I said, you're saying to me that because I'm not a Sikh studies scholar, that you're not going to let me see one book? I said, then you're stifling growth, stifling research. But they took our passports, they took all this, they said, we'll get back to you. I was only there for 10 days. They never got back to us. Oh, now they got a picture of my passport. So maybe there's another Resham Singh running around Amritsar with my passport. I'll find out. I'm going to India in a few weeks. Right, so let me quickly run through this. I've taken a long time. So we established this charity to do something about this. And the aims of the charity are to minimize alteration, to manage the structural well-being of these asthans and extending the life, and identifying asthans that have antiquity. And the way we do that is through research, consulting with experts, engaging with the Sangat like you, and then implementing our work. Our first project, well, our partners in this is somebody called Gurmeet Rai. Now, this lady, she is a formidable expert. She's a conservation architect. She has worked on over 50 heritage sites in India. She's UNESCO awarded. She's worked on Gobindgarh Fort and other places of distinction. She literally has the head of UNESCO in her phone and has been consulting on projects in places like Burma as well. So the point of telling you all that is that clearly she has expertise. We reached out to her before the charity was formed to say, look, we need to do something. She's very passionate about Sikh architecture and Sikh heritage, but she's never really received the patronage and the willpower from the local Sangat to do something more meaningful. And we said, look, we've heard about this Haveli, Kavi Santokh Singh's Haveli. Gyani Sher Singh Ji's purchased it. It's in a bad way. It's where most of our, Suraj Prakash, whatever you think about it, it was written there, but a lot of our history comes from there. And it's a very important heritage site, and it's unique and original. And Bhai Singh identified it through his research, and we now have an opportunity to restore it. And she was like, I'm fully 100% on board. She's brought her company on board. And so now we're partnering with them. This is one of our projects. So this is Guru Ki Masjid in Sri Hargobindpur. This is the masjid that Guru Hargobind had constructed for the Muslims of the area. This is a picture from the early 1900s of what it looked like. This is what it looked like before the conservation work. So all the plaster's fallen off, the bricks are falling off, the domes are cracking. And there on the right is what it looked like after the conservation was redone by her team with the limited budget that she was given. Here is a local, again, they use indigenous people with indigenous knowledge. So the workers that are working here are people who know how to work with lime mortar, Nanak bricks. And you can see how well they restored the walls in line with what was there before, okay? Keeping the original character, giving work to people, our own people who still possess, look how old he is, how many years of experience must he have, how much gyan must he have, right? This is the other big problem that we've got. We've let this generation pass by. Jinan ko bahut kuch siga, bahut gyan siga, bahut vidya. Because this generation struggled. These are the people that have built our futures, the ones who even came out here. It's this generation that faced everything and built these gurdware, and now our generation is reaping the benefit. But what do we do with that benefit? And how do we learn from them? Questions to ask. How does it work? So I'm going to show you the site in a second, but the Kavi Santokh Singh Chudamani Trust is the charity that now owns that building, because Gyani Sher Singh Ji set it up. We are Virasti Asthan Seva, we're the primary fundraiser, but we actually also work as logisticians, working between the two charities here. And the Cultural Resource Conservation Initiative, that's Gurmeet Ji's company. So that's the trifecta. So this is the first project. Now this project, I'm glad to say, Maharaj Kirpa, is actually already progressing. And this is what we've done so far. This is the Haveli Kavi Santokh Singh. So this is where Suraj Prakash is written. It was Kaviji's home between 1824 and 1843, where he then died. Gathal, where it's based, is in Haryana now, but Gathal used to be a Sikh kingdom that was run by a group of Sikh rulers outside of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's power. So just briefly, people know that Ranjit Singh had his rule, but other Sikh Maharaja had Patiala, Jind, Faridkot, and Gathal was another one. And Gathal actually fell to the British in 1843 when Bhai Gurdas Singh died and didn't have any sons to pass it over. Bhai Veer Singh, the very great Bhai Veer Singh, who is responsible for bringing Punjabi literature to the fore, starting Wazir Hind Press, published many stikes of Gurbani, did a lot for the community. He actually published the first versions of Suraj Prakash in print, and he actually interviewed Kavi Santokh Singh's granddaughter, which is how we know this Asthan is where he wrote it, because the granddaughter told us, or told him. And he wrote about this all in the first volume of his printed edition of Suraj Prakash. Now, why is this building important? Even if you don't particularly care about Kavi Santokh Singh or the Haveli or the fact that he wrote Suraj Prakash there, its architecture is remarkably similar to old Gurdwara. We can learn a lot about Puratan Sikh architecture by looking at it. This is an old Gurdwara in Sangrur. It doesn't exist like this anymore, but notice the common features: a painted diori, marble plinths, all these alcoves for dive, opened windows like this. These buildings, what they call havelis, are townhouses, but they're actually mini forts, and they're very secure. Now, Sikh buildings have always had a military aspect to them from the early days, because Sikhs have always had to fight. In the podcast with Basics that we did, I showed pictures of havelis in Pakistan, where during the partition, Sikhs made their last stand against mobs. These havelis are extremely well built, extremely well thought out from a security perspective, and obviously they look good as well. Now, if you want to go to a more important Gurdwara, This is an original image of Gurdwara Sisganj before the current building was built. This was only posted online like 10 days ago, so I'm really glad he posted it, because the minute it's a Singh called Manas Singh, right? And he posted it, and I thought, wait, look at that. Painted duri, marble plinth, balcony, carved windows, right? These are very similar features to the Haveli of Kavi Santokh Singh, aren't they? So we can learn a lot about what was there before, the style of architecture, the style of painting, the style of decoration from Haveli Kavi Santokh Singh, and it translates to what was there before across a lot of Punjab, across a lot of Delhi. I'll let you look at that a bit longer. So Sisganj now obviously is a much bigger double-story building with a gold dome. It was constructed in the 50s to be bigger than what it is now. But this is what was there before. This is just a video of the front of the Haveli, so you can appreciate its sheer size. It's actually a very large building. Sorry, the resolution's not great. It's better on the laptop. And this is from the inside. So Havelis are courtyard buildings, which means they are square, and in the middle there's a central courtyard. This building only has 2 wings left because the half of it fell down because of an earthquake. So there's only this L shape that's preserved. But within this L shape, there's about 16 rooms. So you can imagine how big the original Haveli was. So this was a big site. And this Haveli was gifted to Kavi Santokh Singh by Bhai Gurdas Singh. He invited Kaviji to come and write here. So again, another example of how Sikhs of the past gave money for future Sikhs to learn Vidya, whatever it was, be it rag, be it poetry, be it whatever language, Farsi, whatever. And this is how we had Vidwans in the Panth. It's something we need to think about. Sorry, I don't know why it's playing again. These are some of the features. So you can see those carved brickwork elements. These are the carved wooden doors. You can see the intricacy there and how much workmanship must have gone into making a 3-tiered frame like that. Darbar Sahib has doors like this, well, it used to. The Darshani Diori used to have carved shisham wood with ivory inlay, but those doors were replaced a few years ago. You can still see them. They're lying in the Central Sikh Museum on this side. So phase 1 of this project was to get the conservation architects in. They spent 3 months documenting the site, and this is the result. These 3 large books I can show you at the end if anybody's interested. They document the whole site. They show all the floor plans. It's probably the most documentation anyone's ever done of a historical Sikh site. It's 600 pages long. They tested all the bricks, the material for strength and stability and moisture and all these things. And it also allowed us then for them to give us an estimate of how much the thing was going to cost, because they were able to then map out a scope of work. So all of that is done and paid for. It was done between April and July last year. So phase 1 was that planning phase, and that's all done, and we've paid it off. We raised £15,000, £15,700, and paid it off. So now we're into phase 2, which is the actual work proper, which is based on these reports. Okay, so obviously the work is proceeding along that. Now phase 2 is actually restoring this Haveli, and that started in December. So this is just more on the report. So there's a report. Okay, this is not projecting very well, so sorry, I'll just skip over this. But we've got 3D renders of what it's going to look like afterwards. The architects have made those. They're going to rebuild the missing wings to stabilize the structure, because you can't just have half a building standing. That's not great from a structural perspective. Here you can see the later add-on. So this was a concrete building used as a toilet. That's all been removed. All of this was new build, concrete bricks. That's all been taken away. And only the original building has been left. This is the floor plan, and this is the phasing. So this really isn't that clear. Okay, so the work is going to progress now in another 3 phases, and they're working essentially on, this is the L shape. That's one phase. This is the second phase, but this is the first phase. So they're working on those front 4, where there's 4 rooms on the ground and the first floor. And that's what they're doing at the moment. And these are some videos of what we've been up to in the last couple of months. Okay, these are not projecting. I'll show you these. They're much better on the laptop if anyone wants to see them afterwards. The point being that work is already underway. I'll move on to the pictures because these are not great. So here's the work progressing. There was a tree growing out the side of the building, which is crazy. This is a pipal tree, and you can see all the cracks that it was causing. Here's the tree's already been removed, and they're dismantling all the loose bricks and then reconstructing using those same bricks, having cleaned them and then using lime mortar. So traditional materials with the knowledge of structural engineers being done in a proper way with people with knowledge to do it. And this work is currently ongoing now. So they're making excellent progress. I can show you more pictures and you can see it on our Instagram. So where are we in terms of funding for this charity? We know that that's what the figure is. The closest estimate, £251,665. And the first phase that we're doing, those front 4 rooms, is going to cost around 63. Sorry, so disregard the phasing because it's changed order, £63,000. and it's going to take them roughly 6 to 8 months to do it, probably. And we're about a month and a half in. For Virasti to do the work that we need to do, we need to get to a point where we're raising about £10,000 a month. And we currently receive about £2,000 a month in monthly donations. And then we get roughly about between £1,000 and £1,500 in one-off donations on top. But we launched a fundraiser, and of this 63, the first phase amount that we need, the Janamsakhi Singh Trust, the ones who own the building and are administering it, have given £20,000 of their charity money. And we've raised something nearly, maybe about £30,000. So we're pretty close to having funded the first phase, but that's through a lot of effort and a lot of campaigning and a lot of one-off donations from people. And to put it bluntly, a lot of minta from me to family members. But Virasti's got a lot of work to do. We need to finish this project, and we have another project lined up too. The point is, there's actually a lot of derelict buildings, a lot of heritage buildings across Punjab that can still be saved. Things that, and our ultimate goal for all of this is not just to revive dead buildings. This Haveli will become a Vidyalaya for learning Gurmat. It will have a museum space that talks about Kaviji's contributions, and it will be a flagship project that shows the community what is possible when we work together and put our money to good use to save heritage. My dream for all of this is to create a heritage trail. You know, in this country, you can literally go to any Tutti share, I don't mean to cuss anyone, but any back and beyond town, and you'll find a heritage trail. There'll be some museum space, there'll be this, even this, it's not just London or Birmingham or whatever. You go anywhere, you can go to Thetford or whatever, and you can find a museum, right? And we need to be like that. The Sikh culture has so much to offer the world. We need to fall back in love with it ourselves, and then we need to project it out there and not be shy about it. Yeah, Notre Dame was burnt down in a fire, the big church in Paris. They've been restoring it. I'd urge you to follow their page. It's very interesting. How much? 7.5 million? 700 million. I'm not surprised. Yeah. Yes, but they did. But you know why? Because the French are an incredibly atheistic people. It's not that they care about the church that much, but the church is a symbol of their culture. So even if they're not Roman Catholic attending that church for mass every week, they look at that church and think, this is the pride of France. This is our church. Even if they don't worship, even if they don't believe in God, they put money into it. Because France is all about separation of church and state ever since the French Revolution, right? I've been there, I've had issues with them. They don't understand Dharam at all. They've tried because they felt the church was complicit. Anyway, that's a long other Akarni. Sorry, I don't mean to. But that's the truth, isn't it? Laïcité they talk about. But I did French A-level, that's why I know. But even they, knowing this to be not just a religious symbol, a cultural symbol, right? So this is where the Sikhs, we need to learn from this also. Even these Nastik Bande, who don't even care about God or church, have put money into the church to save it. We do. Well, look, let me be very blunt with you. I've been trying to fundraise for the best part of a year now. I end up giving this talk. I have to take people on a journey. Most people turn around and say to me, nice ho gaya, we might do something, and never do anything. I try to tell them that, look, if 100 Sikh businesses, right, gave £100 a month, which for a business is, for most successful businesses, is nothing. Yeah, let's be honest. The Sikhs are very industrious. I know, like people working in the medical field and the dental field, I know a lot of them who are very successful. I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying the money's there in the community. When I raise these figures, some people are like, oh, bahota. And I'm like, firstly, the Haveli is massive, and then you need to pay for the expertise, which is what we've done, right? Otherwise, try and get any random baba in there to try and, the building is suffering from such structural damage that even the walls are not toothed together properly. So they're implementing solutions to tooth the walls together, right? So this is not a job for the faint-hearted, but the point is, in some ways, we've done the hard work. We've got the site. The site was not even in Panthik hands. It was bought back by Gyaniji 5 years ago. It was owned privately before. So we've got the site, we've got the people who know how to do the know-how, and now it's just the Maya. But the Maya is proving the most difficult thing. Yeah, I think, Baji, I'll tell you the truth. A lot of Sangatan here, the Gurdwara come under pressure from Sangats here, right? They are beholden to them. So they can't always make decisions how they see fit. A lot of Sangatan here will be like, and I've heard this, so I'm just telling you my experience. Why do we care about stuff over there? We should do stuff here. Shall I give you the prime example? And this is not me judging, I'm just telling you. So they're building a Gurdwara. Baji, they are answerable to the Panth, but the real truth is they're not answerable to the Panth. If they were, we would not be where we are now. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, I agree. They are, But it comes back to my earlier answer, okay? Until such time that we have a complete overhaul, right? And the SGPC is a very complex, right? It was created and merged into Indian law when it was established. Well, first it was British law, and that was the first Banga. If they'd created it as an independent body, we wouldn't have the issues now. But the SGPC elections are tied to political elections and party political elections, which is why it's so entrenched with the Akali Dal, right? So to undo the malaise that it's got requires legal unwrappings. It's not so simple. And so my answer to this is, right, so for example, I often give this example. The Islamic community has a very strong central body in Saudi Arabia that has a lot of oil money. And when they decide that they're going to build a mosque, they throw all their money at it, and 2 days later, the money's there, right? And that's how their madrasa and everything are running, and they're a very strong community. Do you know every Gurdwara in this country, because we don't have a central body like that, it was never created that way, and it's certainly not morphed into that. Every Gurdwara in this country wasn't set up with the SGPC saying, Jaake Gurdwara banao. It was whoever had money and a desire to set up a Gurdwara, they set it up, right? So even now, they're setting up a Gurdwara in Surrey, the first Gurdwara in Surrey. You will have seen that, you might have seen their crowdfunding campaign. They've just raised £750,000. Again, that's local people saying we need a Gurdwara, and some rich people coming together, putting some money in, and then the Gurdwara gets established. This is why we have a lot of divisive fights and jagre going on, because each Gurdwara in and of itself has come from a very individualistic basis, because they've only been set up by very well-meaning individuals, and they're run by well-meaning individuals who want to see the Panth prosper. But if you're talking about economies of scale, working together, community cohesion, you won't find it, because they've all been set up as independent islands. So on that basis, what can we do? This is why we set this charity up. And I'm actually like, I still my shukr karda Maharaj, that me sitting here in England, we can do something, right? It might not be the whole grand plan. I'd love to see a central Sikh body that puts priority on educating granthis, pracharaks, raggis, tadis properly, right? The right infrastructure, health services, understanding how Gurmat applies to the world. You name it, right? I believe Gurmat is the cure to the world's ails, right? But we don't have like an Aga Khan type infrastructure. We don't have that. So until such time that happens, then we have to do what Bhai Gurdas saying, or this Uparala, what we're doing. Make whatever we can. I mean, I tell you, this consumes, I'm just telling you, this consumes a lot of my time. But I'm like, in the absence of doing this, I can either just be like fatalistic and be like, kuch nahi hona, might as well give up, I'll just raise my son, I don't care. Or let us all do something in some, it doesn't have to be this, it can be some other project. But if all the Sikhs one day woke up and thought, I'm going to do this one thing, and it might be small, it might be big, but main panth nahi kuch karna, where would we be? Because if our institution isn't working, well, Guru Nanak Dev Ji didn't have an institution to work from. They smashed up the board and started again. Occasionally, that's what you got to do, right? So that's my answer to that question, sorry. So I've told you the financial picture. We do need the community to get on board. We have approached Gurdwara. People are making their decisions, and that's fine. However people want to support, that's okay. And I'm really grateful to this Gurdwara particularly, because they have, from the beginning, given us a platform. Like, we launched the charity at Park Avenue. We've done like 2 or 3 programs. We've spoken to the committee. They've really given us an ajvi. They've given me 2.5 hours of your time and given me the prabandh here to have this conversation. And I really respect that, because actually, that's no small thing. Like, from my experience of approaching other Gurdwara and talking to other people in the community, even this is not a small thing. So, Gurdwara Commission mein dhanwad karda haan, and all the people of this Gurdwara for giving me a platform. But this shows you what we're trying to do. What are we doing as an organization? So obviously I'm talking to you. I'm trying to share the research that we have, trying to secure fundraising, but we're also nurturing arts revival. So we're also trying to now give platforms to young and budding artists, carpenters, painters who are engaged in this space. And there are starting to be revivals of this. Just like we're seeing revivals in Iraq, then we're seeing areas and revivals in these areas too. And these people will be invaluable, because they will help us revive these art forms, and these art forms should then make a comeback into our Gurdwara spaces here, so that we can start to connect back to our roots in an even more meaningful way than we are now. So this is our second project. I'm going to take 2 more minutes because I've gone over time massively. This project won't start until the Haveli project is done. Baba Bikrama Singh Bedi was the son of Baba Sahib Singh Bedi. Baba Sahib Singh Bedi was someone who was very well respected in the Panth. He was so respected that he basically crowned Ranjit Singh and gave him his authority. A lot of the lineages, the Seva Panthis, the Gyani Sampada, a lot of people trace their lineage to Baba Sahib Singh Bedi, and he did a lot to drive the Muslims out of Multan and to secure peace in Punjab, and was known as a repository of knowledge on Gurbani. His son Baba Bikrama Singh was one of the last people to fight the British before Sikh Raj fell. Baba Bikrama Singh was contemporaries with Bhai Maharaj Singh Aurangabad, and these were the people who were really trying to stop the Dogre and all of those people that eventually betrayed us in the Anglo-Sikh Wars, and that's how the Sikh Raj was lost. Baba Bikrama Singh was amassing cannons and rifles and trying to stage the last attempt to fight off the British before he was captured, and then the British captured him, and he was where the British exiled everybody else. So they exiled Baba Ram Singh Namtariya, they exiled Bhai Maharaj Singh to Singapore. They couldn't do that with Baba Bikrama Singh because he was Guru Nanak Dev Ji's familial descendant through Baba Lakshmi Das, the second son. And so they thought there would be outrage. So what they did instead, they imprisoned him in Amritsar. And the site where they imprisoned him, they imprisoned him for 16 years. And that site now is this Asthan that we're looking at. But this Asthan is very interesting because it has very unique fresco paintings that have never been altered. I won't play this video, it's long, but I can show you pictures if you're interested afterwards. It has frescoes of the 10 Guru Sahibs. It's got the unique frescoes of a Taus instrument, of a saranda. They've never been touched, and in fact, our conservation team have already been in. They've taken chemical samples of the paintings to understand what pigments were used, how were they painted. This is the Sikh school of painting, okay? So people have to understand that the Sikhs, right, as a civilization, what does any civilization have? It has culture, right? Any empire, any civilization on the planet has buildings, and it has culture, and it has art, and it has writings, and Sikhi has all of those things too. But if we neglect all of those things, then we're actually cheapening Sikh civilization and diminishing it. Because this is what our ancestors did when they had the time and space to do it. So we need to think about that. Oh God, it's going to stop playing now, sorry. Okay, so that's the second project, but I'm going to wrap it up there. If anybody has any questions, you can ask them now. To summarize my talk, so we started off talking about how Sikhi translates as a philosophy, how Gurmat expresses itself in architecture, how Asthans themselves are revolutionary and become revolutionary spaces when we compare them to contrasting theologies and philosophies. And then we've looked at the whole trajectory of Sikh Asthans, how they've developed, how they've changed, how they've been modified or knocked down or neglected, and then what we can do in the forms of these sorts of projects to identify sites that are still standing, still have antiquity to them, and how we can go about actually saving them and what they can do for us in terms of telling the Sikh story to ourselves and to the world, right? I imagine some of what I've told you today is new history, things that you didn't know before. And I didn't know it before I started these projects. I didn't know who Baba Bikrama Singh was. But because of these projects, I've had to research them and learn about these people. And I think we're richer for it, because now history sometimes, the common narrative only preserves the things that are a bit famous. But we do owe it to the rest of the Panth, all these personalities. We owe it to Baba Bikrama Singh, who put his life on the line when he could have just quite easily sat there and said, Chalo Raj chal gaya. He lost. Don't forget that these families of lineages that are associated with the Gurus, they enjoyed quite a lot of prestige and wealth during this time period. He lost about 80% of all his land wealth and was thrown in jail and died there. But he did it to save the Sikh power. These are things that we should remember as a Panth. This is what our forefathers, our ancestors, our previous Sikhs. If you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going, right? Even like my grandfathers have passed away now, and I'm the youngest of their grandchildren, so I didn't have much time with them. But I constantly say to Mum, I wish I would have, because I would have known, what did these people go through? What did people go through to leave India and come here and set up? How much effort did it take to establish these Gurdwara? How can we learn from it? How can we then take those lessons forward and implement them? Because my problem now is that if we continue to be complacent as a community, and I think we are, in 50 years' time, maybe not this Gurdwara because you have a big Sikh population, but a lot of Gurdwara, especially in East London or other areas that are not so well supported, who's going to go to these Gurdwara if we don't create a culture where the Gurdwara is the center of people's lives? Not just spiritually, but from a communal perspective. And these Gurdwara, like this Gurdwara is doing, when we look at them, they should have huge impact on the community. Now this Gurdwara is doing things like health checks, it's running allotments, it's teaching children, it's doing all these things now. A lot of other Gurdwara don't do that, right? And this is a really good step, huge steps that this Gurdwara is doing, and actually it should continue to do more and more and more, as much as it possibly can. But these heritage asthans feed into that story, and they also impact how we understand history, how we relate to it, how we learn those lessons. Sorry, I can talk forever. Yeah, that's right. That's a good point. So our plan for this Haveli, especially the Kavi Santokh Singh one, is once it's restored, it's going to become a functioning space. So it's not just going to be a dead museum. So it'll have patronage from the Sangat. The Kavi Santokh Singh Chudamani Trust has its own income. This project obviously is the most expensive thing they will do. But you have to remember, once a heritage building is actually inhabited, just the general upkeep of being there means that it doesn't fall into dilapidation. It's much like a house here. If you leave a house in England for a year, you'll get leaks and growth and all sorts of rubbish going on. If it's inhabited, then suddenly it's not such a big deal. And the plan going forward is that we will maintain a relationship with the custodians of the Astan, yearly site inspection, yearly touch-in with the conservation architects for any issues that come up. But financially, it's not going to be a big burden because the work is going to be finished to such a level that then it just requires additional maintenance, right? It's just like any project here. You leave a house for 20 years, it's a much bigger project. You leave it for 150 years, it's a huge project. You leave it for a year or so, it's not a big project. So, and yeah, no, I think those are fair points. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Well, thank you for your time. I know it's been a long talk and a lot of me bambling on. Bhai Sahib's point is right. I always have the feeling that, I think I've said several times, that this Astan is going to be a functioning Gurdwara. It will be a Vidyalaya, so it will be a place where children are educated to a high level in Gurmat. And I always feel that where Guru Sahib is Prakash, then Naam automatically flows, doesn't it? Because Naam, Guru Granth Sahib is the source of Naam. So where Bhai Sahib is talking about how are we going to connect with Naam and Shabad, well, it will function as a Gurdwara. It's going to function as a Vidyalaya. So those are the key aspects to it. And hopefully from the beginning of the presentation, where I started everything was from a Gurmat basis. So you can understand how Naam and Shabad are important here. But I think we also need to understand that Naam, Shabad, Gurbani is really important, but history contextualizes a lot of that as well. For example, there's a Shabad that comes in Gurbani, Sulhi te Narayan Rak, it's Guru Arjan Dev Ji Shabad. And the Shabad is all about how Guru Arjan Dev Ji is doing Shukrana to Maharaj for saving them from Sulhi Khan, who was about to attack them to steal the bricks that were being used for Sri Harmandir Sahib. Now, if you don't know the history, how will you ever do the Arth of Sulhi? Because that's not a word that is in someone's name, right? And if you don't know that history, if you don't know the oral history, you don't know the history that's in Surya Prakash, then how could you possibly know that Sulhi is Sulhi Khan? You can't. So I think if we were just resurrecting a fort or something, say for example, we were just if we had the original Chamkaur Sahib and we were resurrecting it, and we were just thinking, oh, how is this going to get us closer to Guru Sahib? Well, most of the time we do Prakash, and I would say that's the ultimate answer. But secondly, these forts connect us to the history of Guruji's battles. And why did Guruji fight those battles? And that's important, because then we're talking about practical implementation of Gurmat. Do you see the connection? Sorry, I'm just thinking flippantly, so yeah. I fully agree with you. And Paji was just saying, there's these granths called Uthanka granths. And what Uthanka means context. And a lot of the speaks of Gurbani owe all of that information to what Kaviji did in the Suraj Prakash, because you would not know the context. How would you know where the Aarti Shabad was recited? At what place? The Aarti Shabad doesn't say where it was recited. Gagan Mathal. It doesn't say where Guru Nanak Dev Ji recited that Shabad. So how would you know which Astan, which festival it was recited at, or who Guruji was talking to? Context is very important in Gurbani. So preserving history and historical sites feeds into the context of Gurmat and Gurbani. Kaviji's Astan is important because Kaviji himself did something that was not done before, which was to write down all these oral histories. So all these oral histories that I was telling you that have been wiped out of Pakistan because the Sangats aren't there, we can look at Suraj Prakash and find them. And you can't put a value on that. Antipaji. Fully agreed. And this is a point I've sort of dwelled on before. Gurbani is written in poetic form. And then that's no accident, because it evokes emotion and feeling and allows you to connect with it in a way that prose doesn't, right? And Kaviji also chose the poetic form. And, I had the great honor of writing a Nanak Prakash translation. And again, the idea for that came from the frescoes at Babatal. So in my own brain, I've seen how creative expression leads to other creative expression and generates new ideas. And having done that translation, I really am in awe of Kaviji's, because he created a medium for us to express Guruji's history. And ultimately, it doesn't really, whilst dates, facts, and figures matter, right? for me, it's not the date that Guruji met Bhai Lalo that matters. It's what Guruji said to Bhai Lalo. Right? That's still in my brain. That whole Sakhi with the rotis and the blood and all of that. What are you learning from that? I have to live an honest life. I have to do it honestly. I can't right? And that has, from childhood, is something that's ingrained in me. And I don't forget it. Whereas if I was to write it as, on this date, hoya, Guruji met Bhai Lalo, and there's no expression, no feeling, it doesn't stay in the brain for the sake of it. Yeah, I think I'll just say to Bhai Saab's point about the wow factor. For me, I'm a bit like, maybe I need less convincing because I've been in this space for a long time. But I would say to you, this opportunity, I think, represents probably the first tangible opportunity to do something to save Sikh heritage, to say you were part of something, a new cultural revolution in the Sikh Panth to address heritage issues. And the thing is, I know people have been complaining about Gar Seva for many, many years. Every time something happens, and Taran happened, everyone's like, someone needs to stop them. And I'm like, well, there's a time and place for everything, but is this not a jawab to that? Well, yeah, you need to, and if I was just, sometimes I get people's point, if I was just giving this talk and being like, ahoya, very bad, let's go home, then I might be like, yeah, I'm just part of the problem whinging. But hopefully, by showing you the charity, I hope to convey that we're actually doing something quite tangible. And when we brought this charity out, me and the other trustees, we really felt that we're not going to go to the Sangat until we've got all the systems in place, all the experts in place, a whole costed plan, because we know that the Sangat generally gets worried about how is money being spent, and they can sometimes be skeptical, especially about Indian projects, right? So we hope to show you, by showing you all of that, all the schematics, everything, that we have actually thought this out properly. And what we need now is people to say, you know what? I don't like the fact that heritage is disappearing, but here we go. Here's an opportunity to stop it and to change the cultural narrative. And that's another problem that we've had, because obviously, look, without opening too many cans of worms, I just say this: young, one of the first things that I was taught by my mum is that there is no absolute in life. There's no good or bad. You can never judge somebody outright. There's always some good to be taken out of something, or silver lining. Now, what a lot of people don't understand, and I put this down to a bit of a literacy amongst our own people, is that any katha that you've heard, any story you've heard, be it the Shahidi of Guru Arjan Dev Ji, Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji, Chote Vadde Sahib Shah, anything, pretty much anything, will have its root in Suraj Prakash. Bhai Veer Singh popularized it by condensing it down into Guru Nanak Chamatkar, Sri Kalgita Chamatkar, all of those writings, which he took it out of the Brij Pasha poetry and then wrote it in prose to make it more accessible. But he acknowledges that in his writings, if you've read them properly, Bhai Veer Singh, that the source for this is Kavi Santokh Singh. So even if ideologically you find disagreements with what's written in Suraj Prakash, what you cannot deny is that the vast majority of history that we know now, and all the prasangs that we hear, and the Bo Mahina's just passed, and we've all heard it, has its roots in what Kaviji did. And so for me, I'm like, as Sikhs, the right thing to do is to acknowledge that. You can't just be like, oh, I don't like 10% of it, so I'll just discredit all of it, and I'll malign the guy, and gal khatam. It doesn't speak to the mindset that Guruji's taught us. Okay, you critically evaluate something. You take the good and the virtuous things from something, and you leave the things that you think don't agree with Gurmat. And that's how our ancestors have always worked. I think this knee-jerk reaction to I'm in this camp, you're in this camp, is why we're so fractionalized as a community now. Because you've got to use nuance. But any other questions otherwise, Hanji? Yes, you do weekly Suraj Prakash Katha at Park Avenue, which Gyani Jeevanpal Singh, one of our trustees, is doing with Basics. So I want to thank you all for your time. It's gone over. Hopefully, if I've offended anyone or said anything that you think is wrong, then maaf karna. This is just my humble attempt of research on what I think needs to happen. And I'm hoping more of the community gets on board with it. Because I just feel that as Sikhs, every other community has told its story, keeps its history intact, and then projects that to the world, and the whole world knows it. But we Sikhs don't even know our own story. Like I'm talking about all these personalities, and we don't know them. And I think we need to wake up and learn them and share them, and then bring that to the fore. Like even this Gurdwara now, there's a whole, like, I saw on Instagram you were appealing for information about when this Gurdwara was first set up, because you want to make a book about it, right? So if it's important to document the history of Singh Sabha Southall, Havelock Guru Nanak Road, which was Havelock Road, isn't it almost like 100 times more important to document the actual Puratana Sthans and their history? Otherwise, then I don't understand the disconnect personally, logically, but Exactly. I know. I know. But that's what I'm saying. We've got books about things that happened 30, 40 years ago, but there's a whole chunk of history that's been neglected, and we need to look at it. So I'll have to call it a day here, but if you are interested in our work, you can go to www.virasti.org, or you can see us on Instagram. And yes, I will appeal, if you are able to give something donation-wise, please consider doing so. We can only do this work if the Sangat supports us, otherwise it's all Guru Maharaj's Kirpa anyway. And we've got this far, and I have full faith that we will finish it. But only with the Sangat can we do such things. So, Bol Chok Maaf, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.